But unfortunately, it'll never happen.
Front! Punches! He punches! And it's over!
I think it's going to be over.
Aguero in big trouble against the ropes!
I have to say there seems an element of genuine hate between these two, Ambrose.
For sure. I don't hate the man.
Just imagine if you bought a ticket. Stop it, Greg. You can stop it any time. Castillo's in trouble. Weak steps in, and the fight is over.
Welcome back to the Legendary Nights podcast, episode number 5 of season 3, the tale of Sonny Liston versus Cassius Clay. This is a great tale. We're really looking forward to doing this one because we've done so much on both fighters throughout our podcasting careers. We've done Sonny Liston's career profile, Muhammad Ali, aka Cassius Clay's profile. We've also done the fight of the century, the thriller in Manila. We've talked about Sonny Liston on the darker side of boxing. So I think in some ways this is going to be like the final piece of that jigsaw between Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston. I think this is what is really going to solidify our coverage of these two fighters, their respective careers and their respective intertwining roads that they're on.
Yeah, it's a great one, isn't it? I mean, we've done everything on Sonny Liston, it feels like, and he's the only fighter we've ever done everything on. We've done Dark Side of Boxing, as you said, career profiles now. Muhammad Ali's, I think it's his 3rd now, or even 4th possibly. And yeah, obviously done a career profile very early, which we may revisit at some point. But look, there's some great stories in here, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it.
Now, we're going to begin our tale with the fall of the mob. The California State Athletic Commission, the Los Angeles Police Department, and the Bureau all worked together to bring the underworld of boxing to a standing count. Frankie Carbo, Blinky Palermo, Jim Norris, and Truman Gibson, plus Louis Tom Dragner and Joe Seeker, were all rounded up and charged with conspiracy to violate the Federal Anti-Racketeering Act, interstate communications, extortion, and conspiracy. But Gibson was only accused of conspiracy. In 1958, a grand jury in New York indicted Carbo in his absence while said to be holidaying in Mexico for conspiracy, undercover management of boxers, and matchmaking without a legal license in contests arranged and promoted by the IBC. Gabe Genovese was indicted, arrested, and tried, described as an evil and degrading influence on professional boxing for over 2 decades. Genovese, it was claimed in court, was Carbo's bagman, and he was sentenced to 2 years in jail and then released after little more than a year in Rikers Island, and actually died not too long after that. The following year, in January 1959, the Supreme Court broke up the IBC, declaring that it had conspired to control World Championship boxing in the whole of the United States and was in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Norris was ordered to sell his interests in Madison Square Garden, which he did within a month. On May the 31st, 1959, Carbo was arrested at a house in western New Jersey. Police officers said he was relieved when he discovered it was lawmen who had come for him and not rival gangsters.
So 1 year on, in March 1960, we're going to start with Sonny Liston, who destroyed Cleveland Williams in their rematch inside 2 rounds. After the fight, Liston said he had his ticket number going in. The following month, Liston stopped Roy Harris inside 1 round after he had gone the full 12 rounds in a world title bid against Floyd Patterson. In July 1960, Liston blasted out the talented Zora Foley in just 3 rounds. Foley did counter punch successfully in the first round, but was knocked down face first by a right hand in the second. Foley did not get up, but he fought on until he was floored again by a right hand. It took less than half a minute of the round for Liston to finish it off. A confused Zora Foley actually asked what happened. Liston replied, "I knocked you out." "Oh, I remember now. And they told me not to worry about your right hand." Foley said later, "My plan was to box him. I didn't. I thought I could knock him out." But he still believed, even sort of not long after that, he felt like he threw the fight away by his own stupidity. He also said he thought Patterson would be too quick for Liston, but then later changed his prediction and predicting quite perfectly. Then he said, "It will do me no favours saying it, but Liston would knock Patterson over with the first punch he landed." Liston liked Foley and he respected him for not running and giving it a go. He's honest and smart and a gentleman besides being a darn good fighter. He's the kind of guy I'd be pleased to call a friend.
Over a span of 6 years from the age of 12 until he was 18, Cassius Clay won, according to some sources, 134 of 141 amateur contests, and according to others, 176 of 181, culminating in his selection as the USA's light heavyweight representative for the Rome Olympics. In 1959 and 1960, Clay won the National AAU Light Heavyweight Championship, was the National Golden Gloves Light Heavyweight Champion, then added the heavyweight crown. He also won the light heavyweight competition in the Olympic trials in San Francisco after the plane from Louisville had passed through a storm that terrified him. He threw away his return ticket and, after borrowing money from a referee, caught the train home. Clay wanted to turn professional before the Olympic trials, but Officer Joe Martin, who had coached him throughout his amateur career, persuaded him not to. It was the police officer who sat him down after he returned on the train from San Francisco and told him he needed to deal with his fear and get himself on the plane to Rome. Sugar Ray Robinson said in his autobiography by Dave Anderson of the New York Times that before the Olympics, Cassius asked him to be his manager. Sugar Ray, who had never met him before, told him it was impossible because he was still boxing and wouldn't have time to do both. Robinson said Clay had waited for 3 hours in the hope of bumping into him. As a result, the great man kept an eye on his career and from time to time acted as an unofficial advisor. Clay did fly to Rome and he was selected to compete for the United States in the Olympics in the light heavyweight class. In his opening bout on August the 30th, 1960, he beat a Belgian named Yvon Biekhuis in the second round.
He then outscored the former Olympic middleweight champion and twice European champion, Gennady Shatkov. Shatkov said because Clay was taller and bigger than he was, he couldn't beat him at long range, and so was forced to try something different. For 2 rounds, he felt that he held his own, but in the third, Clay stretched clear. In the semi-finals, Cassius Clay repeated a previous victory over the American-based Australian Tony Madigan. While in Rome, Clay actually took part in a media interview with journalists from the Soviet Union who asked him how he felt about possibly winning a gold medal for his country, yet he was unable to eat in some restaurants in his hometown. And Clay replied in only how Clay did. Russian, he called him. We got qualified men working on that problem. We got the biggest and prettiest cars. We get all the food we can eat. America is the greatest country in the world, and as far as places I can't eat goes, I got lots of places I can eat. More places I can than I can't. I ain't fighting off alligators and living in a mud hut. Russian, there's good and bad in every country. And if there weren't good and bad, we wouldn't be talking about Judgment Day. Well, in the final of the Olympic final, Cassius Clay wrapped up the gold medal with another decision victory, this time over a seasoned vet, a 26-year-old southpaw from Poland. Now, Clay peppered him with raking punches, blooded his nose, and claimed the gold with another 5-0 unanimous verdict. Cassius Clay used the Olympics as a platform to launch himself as a celebrity athlete as well as a fine boxer.
On the way home, Clay and Joe Martin stopped off in New York. A businessman sponsor from Louisville, Billy Reynolds, installed them in a suite in the Waldorf Astoria, next to the one used by the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, interestingly, and he gave him money to buy presents for his family. Cassius spent $450 on watches for his father, mother and brother. When they were back home, he talked about meeting the world heavyweight champion, Floyd Patterson, who himself had won Olympic gold at middleweight in Helsinki in 1952, and he said, "Floyd came by to see me. We had a little talk. It was a friendly talk, but if possible, I would like to fight him one of these days. I didn't look at him right, and he didn't look at me right, but we were friendly. Back home in Louisville, he drove down Walnut Street in a pink Cadillac with the great sprinter Wilma Rudolph alongside him. He was 18, she was 20. Wilma had won the 100 and 200 metre gold medals in Rome, and another in the 4x100 relay. Cassius had met her in the Olympic Village, and she was visiting him from her home in Clarksville, Tennessee. As they drove through Louisville, he began calling out to the crowds that he was Cassius Clay, and he was the greatest. He then introduced Wilma, shouting, "She is the greatest." Wilma told him to sit down, but he wouldn't let up, and she stood up and took a bow. 30 years on, she said, "I saw him at the very beginning. It was bedlam. I always told him, you should be on stage."
Brilliant. And in September 1960, jumping back to Sonny Liston, he took on Eddie Matron, who, like Foley, had been avoided by Patterson, or more accurately by Custy Amato. Now, Matron was an excellent defensive fighter who gave Liston a frustrating night, going the full 12 rounds, losing on points. As he skipped side to side, in and out, he would taunt Liston. "Come on, big punch, come on, show me that big, terrible punch." Liston swung and he missed repeatedly, becoming increasingly frustrated because he couldn't set himself against the very much moving Matron, who acknowledged the power in Liston's left hand. He said, "The guy is all animal. Yes, he can fight." And Liston was annoyed after getting criticised after the win, saying, "All I tried to do was make the fight. I looked like a bum. I never heard nobody say Matron looked like a bum. Only me." Now, Matron's excuse for fighting so defensively was because he had damaged his right shoulder in sparring, but took the fight because, as they all do, needed money. Liston was called before the Kiefer hearings. Now, officially, the subcommittee for the antitrust and monopoly of the US Senate Judicial Committee in Washington, D.C. Now, this was on December the 13th, 1960. And Lieutenant Joseph Cuda of the St. Louis Police Department actually testified that police investigations revealed that Liston was owned by Frankie Carbo. I mean, we've gone into some of this stuff before, by Carbo at 52%, Palermo and John Vitale at 12% each, and two others who were unidentified, still at this time, only 12% each. When this possibility was put to Liston himself, he said he didn't know. He said, "You know your boss, but you don't know who he's with. You know he pays you, and that's all. But you don't know who gets his money from or where he gets his money from."
Carbo was taken out of his jail cell in December 1960 to actually testify to the committee, and he answered 25 questions by taking the Fifth Amendment, repeating each time, "I respectfully decline to answer the question on the ground that I cannot be compelled to be a witness against myself." Similarly, Blinky Palermo, Frank Mitchell, and John Vitale also took the Fifth Amendment when questioned on all subjects, including their involvement in the management of Sonny Liston. Now, interestingly, after his Rome success, the Nation of Islam was already Cassius Clay's preferred religion, although he wasn't yet confident enough to speak about it. The teachings of the Nation of Islam had interested him from when he was in school. He avoided pork, he said, because it made his blood pressure rise, but perhaps because Islam forbids it. He wanted Mildred, his girlfriend at the time, who he told he would marry when he was rich and famous, that she would have to wear longer dresses, and he wanted to write his school essay about the movement. The foundations of what he would become, well, they were already emerging, but his youthfulness and naivety were evident when he told the journalist Houston Horn after winning the gold in Rome, "Last Sunday, some cats I know said, 'Cassius, Cassius, come on now, let's go to church, otherwise you won't get to heaven.' 'Hold on a minute,' I said to them, 'and let me tell you something else. When I've got me $100,000 house, another $250,000 stuck in the bank, and the world title latched onto my name, then I'll be in heaven. Walking around making $25 a week with 4 children crying at home because they're hungry, that's my idea of hell.'"
Well, Billy Reynolds, who ran the Reynolds Metal Company and who had shelled out for his stopover, as in Cassius Clay's stopover in New York, he actually offered a 10-year contract with Martin remaining as his advisors, as the police officer. But word reached him that the family had problems about that. And Martin believed that Cassius at this time was still afraid of his dad. Obviously, Cassius is still a young lad, teenager. So this is Martin. He said, we were all at Wilson Wyatt's office in Louisville to sign a contract for me to manage Cassius and train him. One of the lawyers took me aside and said, I hate to tell you this, but old man Clay will not sign any contract with your name on it. I said, why? What's he got against me? And the lawyer said, either it's because he thinks you've done something for his son that he couldn't do, or because you're a police officer. Later, I read that the old man didn't like cops in general and me in particular. Well, according to Time magazine, he ignored, as in this is Clay, ignored offers to manage him from Custy Amato, Archie Moore, which we're going to in a minute, and Pete Radermaker. When an alternative came from a syndicate of 11 wealthy Kentucky businessmen, this was immediately more attractive, especially as it came with a $10,000 sign-on fee, a minimum guaranteed salary of $4,000 for 2 years, plus training expenses rising to $6,000 for 4 years, and 50% of all the purses. So, I mean, he's laughing. The syndicate had no problem with leaving Martin out of the deal to please Mr. Senior Clay. At the head of the syndicate, which called itself the Louisville Sponsoring Group, was Bill Faversham Jr., who had made a fortune as vice president of the Brown Forman Distillery in Louisville. Now, they retained the option to renew the contract up until October 1966, when they had the right to make Clay another offer.
15% of Clay's purse money went into a pension fund that could not be touched until he was 35 or had retired from boxing. Some more was invested in US government bonds. On part of the consortium, J.D. Stetson Coleman, he said, we think we can keep him out of the financial trouble that Joe Louis got into, which almost made me sick to see. In Cassius, we saw a good local boy with a clean background from start to finish. With the proper help and encouragement, he could bring credit to himself and his hometown. There are plenty of wolves who would leap at the chance to get their paws on Cassius, to exploit him, and then to drop him. We think we can bring him along slowly, aim good fights, and make him the champion he wants to be. Cassius Clay was still only 18 when he made his professional debut against Tony Hunsaker at the Freedom Hall in Louisville on October the 29th, 1960. He was coached by Fred Stoner, who ran the gym in Louisville that Clay had used as an alternative to Joe Martin's. Cassius won on points over 6 rounds, leaving his opponent with 2 half-closed eyes. And Hunsaker said, I tried everything I knew to throw him off balance, but he was just too good. For 6 weeks, Cassius was sent off to learn under Archie Moore and Dick Sadler in San Diego. But it didn't work out because Moore was too old school for young brash Clay, who refused to sweep up, scrub floors and wash the dishes. And as a result, Clay challenged Archie to a sparring session, but Archie Moore refused, saying that he did not spar with amateurs. After their relationship broke down, Cassius Clay returned to Louisville and struck a deal with a certain Angelo Dundee for $125 a week.
So Cassius Clay had travelled to Miami, where Angelo Dundee ran that Fifth Street gym, the famous Fifth Street gym, which was owned by his elder brother, who was Chris Dundee. Angelo adapted Clay's amateur style so he could be more effective in the professional ranks by basically increasing his power and adding more snap to his jab. Now, Fernando Ferdi Pacheco spoke of the first time that he actually met Cassius Clay. So he was the doctor that worked alongside Angelo Dundee. And he said, Angelo and I had formed a team. I'd go over the world with him, watch him work his magic and develop 12 champions. And as the cherry on the cake, he brought Cassius Clay, a kid, to my little office on Northwest 2nd Avenue and 10th Street. Clay was tall, beautifully sculptured and a handsome face. He was a non-stop talking machine. When he left my office after the first visit, my wise nurse, Miss Mabel, shook her head and said, my, either that boy is crazy as loon or he's going to be the heavyweight champion of the world. Well, of course, how right was she? The syndicate actually rented Clay an apartment in Miami, but he struggled to adapt to his new neighborhood, and he actually told Houston Horn that the hardest part of the training is the loneliness. I just sit here like an animal in a box at night. I can't go out in the street and mix with the folks out there because they wouldn't be out there if they were up to any good. But he was committed, and he didn't want to get this far to then just throw it away, just having a good time. So Clay said, now I've got the medal and I've got the car, I'll be plain silly to give in to temptation now, but I'm just about to reach out and get the world title.
1 week into the Clay and Dundee relationship, he stopped Herb Seiler in the 4th round in Miami Beach 2 days after Christmas, 1960. A month later, Clay took on mobbed up Big Tony Asperti, who lasted 3 rounds. Asperti, who had suspicious connections, was actually arrested 11 times for assault and battery, and is believed to have shot dead the mobster Thomas the Enforcer Altamura in a Miami restaurant on October the 31st, 1967, although he was actually never charged. Now, while Clay was training alone in the 5th Street gym after a long session with Dundee, he saw a 13-year-old runaway sat on a bench. Clay made a fuss of him and called him Champ, and when he learned he had nowhere to stay and no money, he let him stay at his home. The boy, Grady Ponder, lived there for a while and would join Clay on his road runs and sit in the back of his Cadillac while he cruised the town. Ponder later converted to Islam and called himself Alim Fakir and said Clay never partied or drunk alcohol. He just trained and read late into the night. In February of 1961, Clay stopped Slim Jim Robinson in 1 round and then beat Johnny Fleeman 1 month later in 6. When Ingemar Johansson trained in Miami for his 3rd fight with Floyd Patterson, the former heavyweight champion agreed to spar a round or 2 with Clay. Clay danced around him, snapping out jabs. Johansson was irritated and said, "What does this kid do? Ride a bicycle 10 miles a day?" Clay said they should fight for real and offered him $100,000 in cash, but Johansson laughed it off, telling him he would sell 3 tickets.
Jumping back to Liston, and on March 8, 1961, Liston actually went on to stop Howard King in just 3 rounds. And then 2 months later, jumping back to the mobs, Mr. Frankie Carbo, Gibson, Palermo, Dragna, Sika, they were all charged and found guilty. Of course they were. 11 days later, the judge who had heard the case, Ernest Tolin, actually died. I'm not sure how he died, but requests for retrials were refused. Then on December the 2nd, 1961, after all the evidence had been reviewed by a replacement judge who was George Bolt, the sentences were handed down. Truman Gibson, the lawyer who had been the only one allowed out on bail, was given a 5-year suspended sentence and fined $10,000. The others were jailed. Carbo got 25 years, Sika got 20 years, Palermo 15 years, and Dragna 5 years. All but Dragna also received that $10,000 fines. Pending appeal, Palermo, Sika, and Dragna were bailed. Carbo was sent to Alcatraz. So that's Liston and the mob situation at that moment. As you can tell, the mob scene is just diminishing, but that doesn't mean they still didn't have ties. We'll jump back to Clay, and for his 6th win, professional win, he returned to Louisville and he beat Lamar Clark in the 2nd round. He actually broke Clark's nose and retired him, but admitted that early in the fight, Clark landed a right hand on the chest and he thought his ribs had caved in. In his next 2 fights, Clay had to go the full 10 rounds to beat Duke Sabdong, a 6'6", 225-pound Hawaiian, and Alonzo Johnson, a high-class journeyman who had once beat Nino Valdez and Willie Pastrano. But who was on the slide at that point? But decent win. That's probably the Clay's best win at that point.
Well, Clay was criticised for the Johnston fight in front of a crowd of 5,000 in his 8th professional outing for being too negative and too showy with not enough substance. One unhappy spectator shouted, "Take away his pink Cadillac." Before Clay's 9th pro fight, he gave an interview in his hotel room, and here's a little bit of that interview, and it reads, Things are getting so rough for me around here. I'm losing all my girlfriends. I don't feel like talking. I don't feel rowdy. But the trouble is, boxing's dying because everybody's so quiet. Patterson's quiet. Harold Johnston's quiet. What boxing needs is more Moores and Robinsons and Clays. I'm an unpredictable young man with a raggedy pink Cadillac. This is my town. When you walk down the street with old Cass, you're liable to get a free bottle of champagne. Where do I find all the things I say? I'm an educated boy. I sit down and think them up. Now, on October the 7th, 1961, Clay stopped the experienced Argentine Alex Matif in 6. In Clay's last fight in 1961, he beat German-born Willy Besimov in 7 rounds and afterwards mocked his opponent and said, "I was embarrassed to get in the ring with this unrated duck. Truly, it embarrasses me to keep fighting these bums. I am ready for Eddie Matron, and Ingemar Johansson, and Sonny Liston, and Floyd Patterson." Besimov was pissed. Nobody has a right to call another fighter a bum. Jumping back to Sonny Liston, he disposed of the German Albert Westphal on December the 4th, 1961, at the Convention Hall in Philadelphia with a right hand in the first round. On the same night, Floyd Patterson survived a knockdown but floored the overmatched Tom McNeely repeatedly for a 4th round win. At long last, the stage was set for Floyd Patterson and Sonny Liston to materialise. Although, of course, it would take a little bit of time.
It didn't. Liston gave an interview with the Police Gazette pleading for his title shot, and he said, "What do I have to do to get it? Patterson says it's the mob that keeps him from fighting me, but there ain't no mob. I am the only mob he's worried about." And obviously the mobs, they were getting busted up, but they were still in the background. He went on to talk about his arrest in Philadelphia the previous year when he was picked up for loitering and then charged with the harassment of Dolores Ellis. We did mention this in his career profile, not to mention impersonating a law officer. Now, Liston felt that incident had poisoned public opinion against him once again. All that publicity didn't do me any good, but it wasn't as bad as the newspaper said it was. People are easily led against you, and it's harder to get them to go along with you. I was brought up in a tough neighborhood with tough guys. They were my friends. Their ways were the only ones I knew. I'm trying to change, but it ain't easy. While Liston tried to change public perception, Cassius Clay, who turned 20 in January, made his New York debut against Lucian Sonny Banks on a small show at the Madison Square Garden in February 1962. A confident Clay actually misjudged his opponent's credentials and was caught in the first round with a perfectly timed left hook. He hit the deck for the first time in his career, but got up, took the fight to Banks, floored him in the second, and eventually stopped him early in the 4th. 18 days later, he had a routine 4th round stoppage victory of Dan Warner in Miami Beach. Then on the 16th of March, 1962, the month the Police Gazette interview was published, so that's the interview with Liston. Liston's pleas were finally answered, and he and Patterson actually signed contracts for the heavyweight championship contest, and Liston said, quite simply, "I'll knock him out."
When the contracts were being finalised, Liston confirmed that he had said he would box Patterson for nothing, and he said, "Well, I admit I said I wouldn't mind fighting him in the gym when there was nobody there to watch." But he never finished his sentence because everybody started laughing. Patterson confirmed that it was his decision alone to take the Liston fight against the advice of Costi Amato, the wishes of the Kiefer Committee and the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People, which viewed Liston as a negative advertisement for the cause. Patterson said, "One night in bed, I made up my mind. I knew if I'd want to sleep comfortably, I'd have to take on Liston. Some people said, what if you lose and he wins? And the coloured people will suffer. But maybe if Liston wins, he'll live up to the title. He may make people look up to him." The group that had negotiated the promotional contract, Championship Sports Inc., wanted to put the fight on in Yankee Stadium or at the Polo Grounds, but a spanner was thrown in the works on April 27, 1962, when the New York State Athletic Commission announced it had refused a boxing license to Sonny Liston. Their reason was justifiable, because they were not convinced that the money Liston was paying his manager, Joseph Pep Barone, was not lining the pockets of Blinky Palermo, who was still out pending an appeal against his sentence. Therefore, they disapproved the fight happening in their jurisdiction. Patterson showed his qualities when he said, "I'm disappointed in the way he has been treated. What's he done? He has already served his time. I feel sorry for him. People keep pointing to Liston and saying, 'There goes the ex-con, the criminal.'"
Well, there you go. You still got these guys are out pending trial, and obviously Blinky Palermo causing a bit of a problem there. Still sticking with Liston, and California and Massachusetts actually followed suit, which ruled out Los Angeles and Boston as venues for the fight. Californian Commissioner Douglas Hayden said, "I don't feel Liston has sufficiently rehabilitated himself, nor has he made too much of an effort toward eliminating the people with whom he has been associated." The Illinois Commission, well, they jumped to the forefront when the chairman, Joseph Trine, said, if they want to bring the fight to Chicago, they can rest assured that Sonny Liston will be given the right. And so the deal was done for the fight to be held in Comiskey Park in Chicago on September the 25th, 1962. The Chicago Tribune was unhappy with that decision. They said, "Don't dump your trash on us." That was their headline. If anyone had trash dumped on them, it was surely none other than Sonny Liston. In April 1962, Clay took 4 rounds again to beat George Logan in the first bout in Los Angeles. Obviously, fight in Los Angeles. Back in New York, Billy Daniels lasted until the 7th. The fight drew 12,000 fans, and Jack Dempsey saw how good Cassius was for a business that had been shaken by years by the mob involvement, which we keep alluding to, but it's just a part of this episode, by scandal and tragedy. And he said, "I don't care if this kid can't fight a lick. I'm for him. Things are live again." Then we're going to jump back to Sonny, and Liston was still the villain who was just waiting to be crowned king, quite simply. But he understood the angle the press were using to describe him when he told Sport Illustrated, "A boxing match is like a cowboy movie. There's got to be good guys and there's got to be bad guys. That's what the people pay for. Everybody thinks I should be mean and tough, but I'm not. Fighting ain't fun. In the ring, I look tough because I'm trying to get the scare on the other guy. And the way some of these suckers fight, I guess they are scared."
Liston only ever wanted to be a people's champion. He said, "If I win, I won't throw my weight around nor be an arrogant person. People do not like that kind of a champion, and I want people to like me." There were some interesting stories on Liston during his training camp in the lead up to the first Patterson fight. Liston's journalist friend from Philadelphia, Jack McKinney, was on hand to interview Liston and those around him. His sparring partner, Jimmy McCarter, who had beaten Liston back in the 1953 National American Athletic Union Championship, said, "Sonny likes to talk about training, but he's lazy. He doesn't like to do road work, and he does not like to be hit in the gut." His reluctance to spar hard probably came from Liston's knowledge of damage to the brain. Liston could not read or write, but he showed his wisdom of boxing when he told Jack McKinney, "See, the different parts of the brain set in little cups like this," and he puts his fists together against each other, and the knuckles knitting together. And he says, when you get a terrible shot, pop, the brain flops out of them cups, and you're knocked out. Then the brain settles back into the cups, and you come to. But after this happens enough times, or sometimes even once, if the shot's hard enough, the brain doesn't settle back right in them cups, and that's when you start needing other people's help to get around. Jimmy McCarter spoke of Sonny's warped sense of humour, and one morning he actually awoke to the sound of a gun being cocked close to his head. Sonny squeezed the trigger and fired a blank. McCarter said, "I guess I annoyed him. He was murdering all the sparring partners in camp, except me. This he didn't like."
However, Liston did have a conscience and a kind side that many people didn't see. If he took money off of sparring partners at cards, he would sometimes give it them back, knowing the man couldn't afford to lose, but was playing the game to please him. He invited boys from the local reform school to watch him train, then let him sit in the press conference. He said, "If I win this fight, You will be able to see there is good and bad in everyone. The way things stand now, everybody thinks there is only bad in me. He told the Chicago Tribune writer, David Condon, why not many knew of his kind of ways. And he says, favors aren't special. You do them from the way you feel in your heart, and you don't talk about them or tell about them. That's how Sonny would have said it, tell about them. You do a friend a favor, you don't brag, you don't tell. Cassius Clay said Liston would knock Patterson out in 5 rounds, and Chicago's American revealed it had polled 50 writers in the press room, and Patterson came out on top 28-22, incredibly. On the night of September the 25th, 1962, at Comiskey Park, home of the Chicago White Sox, Charles Sonny Liston dethroned world heavyweight champion Floyd Patterson in 2 minutes and 6 seconds in the first round. Gilbert Rogan of Sports Illustrated wrote, 1 second Patterson was tottering against the ropes, the next he was collapsing like a bridge table. Those who did have a good look at the punches but were unfamiliar with Liston's work vastly underestimated their force. Liston is not a notably swift and flashy hitter, but that final left hook that crashed into Patterson's cheek was like a diesel rig going downhill with no brakes. Liston explained the finish. He said 3 left hooks to the head did it. I got the idea. I must have hit him good.
Liston then said that he would honour the return clause contract because that was what he was contracted to do. Also because he promised the former world champion. Patterson gave me a break by fighting me, he said. I'm ready to obey the contract. For his sake, I wonder if he will be wise to go in against me again. Patterson always hides away between fights. I want to be a man who can be seen and who they can be proud of. I always go to all the Golden Gloves bouts, the small club fights, and anywhere else there is a fight show. I think the champ should get around and show himself, and that's what I'm going to do. Cassius Clay, in a smart suit with black bow tie, climbed onto the apron on the far side of the ring and looked across at D'Amato and Patterson, his mouth open slightly, just watching. He then told Leonard Schechter of the New York Post it was a disgrace to professional boxing. Archie Moore, who was due to fight Cassius Clay, declared that he was sturdy enough to outpoint Liston over 15 rounds. Clay then announced he would beat Moore in 4 and Liston in 8, and then said, what happened was an embarrassment to boxing. The champion of the world should be able to take a beating longer than that. Liston took his wife Geraldine out to celebrate at the Sahara Inn, where the owner, Manny Scar, had thrown a victory party. Scar was described as a mob gambling representative and mob associate who 3 years later was murdered outside his Chicago apartment in a hit by Joey the Clown Lombardo. Patterson also had a party arranged if he would have won, but of course it was cancelled, so the cake was divided between bellhops, a doorman, and the elevator operator.
Brilliant. They were well happy. So Liston's estimated total for his win was just under 300,000. His assets were actually frozen after, as reported by the New York Times, and the IRS actually took shy of $3 million from the fight's gross total as well. Next day, Liston faced the press and he said, from what I hear on the TV this morning, I'm not going to get paid. He was then asked, how soon will you give Patterson a return bout? And Liston replied, soon as I get paid. Liston was ready to return to Philadelphia and was assured of a large gathering to celebrate his win. He then received a telegram congratulating from the mayor as well, the mayor of Philadelphia, James H.J. Tate, and his journalist and friend, Jack McKinney, remembered as they waited for that plane door to open. All during that plane journey, Liston was thinking of all these things to say. Well, Liston straightened his tie and his hat, anxious to look right for photographs. Then he stepped outside, looked around, hesitated. All he could see were a few scattered journalists, public relations people, and airport staff. And this is what McKinney, who stood by him, said. He said, I watched Sonny. His eyes swept the whole scene. He was extremely intelligent and he understood immediately what it meant. His Adam's apple moved slightly. You could feel the deflation, see the look of hurt in his eyes. It was almost like a silent shudder went through him. He had been deliberately snubbed. Philadelphia wanted nothing to do with him. It was going to be a whole new world. What happened in Philadelphia that day was a turning point in his life. He was still the bad guy. He was the personification of evil. And that's the way it was going to remain. He was devastated. I knew from that point on that the world would never get to know the Sonny that I knew.
Very sad story. We've covered that, of course, for the dark side of boxing and for his career profile. And it saddens me to hear it and to read out the descriptions of Jack McKinney as well, because it is a very pivotal moment. And we both agreed that that was the moment where he decided to be that villain, because nobody accepted him. Nobody wanted to know. So moving back to Cassius Clay, now Frank Butler, the boxing correspondent for the News of the World, was actually keen on neither of Clay nor Moore to fight Liston. And he said Clay is too young and Moore is too old. If garrulous Clay could fight as well as he talks, he would eat Liston alive. The press were not the only ones that felt Clay had a big gob. Even the Cuban fighters in the 5th Street gym had a name for the noisy youngster. They called him Nino con Boca Grande, and in English that translates to the boy with the big mouth. After the Laveronte stoppage, the 20-year-old went into his biggest fight so far against a man who had been briefly employed as his trainer. That was the former world light heavyweight champion, the old mongoose Archie Moore, in Los Angeles on November the 15th, 1962. Clay treated the public to one of his early rhymes when he told the world that ancient Archie would fall in for, and he said, "Archie's been living off the fat of the land, and I'm here to give him his pension plan. When you come to the fight, don't block the aisle and don't block the door. You will all go home after round 4. True to his rhyme, Clay demolished Archie Moore, as he said he would in round 4. Mark Cram was actually present when Cassius Clay met Sonny Liston for the first time close up in November of 1962. The young fighter had just beaten Archie Moore and stood in front of a mirror applying makeup to his face, and he said, "I keep looking like an angel instead of a fighter." Not realising that Sonny had entered the room, Liston put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Take care, kid. I'm going to need you, but I'm going to have to beat you like I'm your daddy." Veteran trainer Willie Ketchum thought Cassius looked at Sonny as though he was holding a gun to his head and said, "Don't let anybody tell you that Clay wasn't scared to death of Liston."
The new year in 1963 began with Clay taking on former footballer Charlie Powell in Pittsburgh. He taunted his opponent at the weigh-in, yelling, "You wait and see. You'll go in free." The rhymes are coming there. And held up 3 fingers. Powell didn't move and just said, "Get your hand out of my face," and wouldn't allow Clay to get under his skin. But as predicted, he was knocked out in 3. Sometime after, Powell actually said this on his defeat. He said, "When he first hit me, I thought to myself, I can take 2 of those to get 1 in on my own. But in a little while, I found I was getting dizzier and dizzier every time he hit me, and he hurt." Clay throws punches so easily, you don't realise how much they shook you until it's too late. Now, while back home in Louisville, Clay told Alan Hobie of the Sunday Express that he wanted to be rich and famous with a huge entourage, very much like his idol Sugar Ray Robinson. And he said, "You think I'm romancing, don't you? Well, I'm not. I don't just talk, you know. I can box too. I'm ambitious. I train as hard as I talk. I want luxury. I want to be world famous. Most of all, I want that heavyweight title. The way I see it, I don't make money unless I draw people. And the only way I can draw people in this game is if I talk loud and long." He then told Time magazine, "This is the story about a man with iron fists and a beautiful tan. He talks a lot and boasts indeed of a powerful punch and blinding speed." 2 months later, and Clay was ready for a fight against Doug Jones at Madison Square Garden. He spoke into a television camera to the camera crew.
Well, this is what Cassius Clay had to say. "That ugly little man, I'll annihilate him. You know what this fight means to me? A tomato red Cadillac Eldorado convertible with white leather upholstery, air conditioning, and a hi-fi. That's what the group is giving me as a victory present. Can you picture me losing to this ugly bum Jones with that kind of a swinging car waiting for me? I get sore and Jones falls in 4. Less than a week before the fight, and Madison Square Garden was sold out. Whether people wanted to see Clay win or lose, it didn't matter. His tongue and performances were selling tickets. Of course he was booed into the ring, booed during the fight and afterwards. Jones was no bum. He was tough and lasted the full distance. He gave Clay his hardest fight to date, but he still took a unanimous decision, Cassius Clay. The crowd booed and yelled "fix" and threw rubbish into the ring, including cartons of peanuts. Clay goaded them back, picked up some peanuts, and then ate them. The complaints went on for around 10 minutes. While back in his dressing room, Cassius said, "They can boo as long as they pay. See, I'm pretty as a girl. There isn't a mark on me. Doug didn't fall. That's all. I want Liston. He can't move as fast as Jones. Liston will go in 8. Watching on television, Sonny Liston said he felt Clay had won but added, "I'll get locked up for murder if I fight him." Speaking of murder, on February the 13th, 1963, the Court of Appeals in San Francisco completed the conspiracy to violate the Federal Anti-Racketeering Act, extortion and conspiracy case, and Dragna was freed. His conviction overturned. Seeker got off on one of the 3 charges against him, but his sentence remained. But the convictions of Carbo, Palermo and Gibson, well, they all stood.
Before Clay left for London to take on our very own Henry Cooper in the summer of 1963, Jack Dempsey dismissed him as a contender, and he said he needs a lot of training. It would be ridiculous for him to get in there now with Liston. Johansson will probably knock Clay out. Patterson too. He needs a lot more fights. On June 18, 1963, Clay arrived in England to face Cooper at Wembley Stadium in front of a crowd of 35,000. Clay was in great form as usual, telling the press, "This will be an annihilation. If the bum don't fall in 5, I won't come back to this nation." During a dinner in a Soho restaurant, Clay actually said, "I'm real mad the way I've been received. I stick to all I said about Cooper." Now, Henry, of course, on the other hand, which we did mention in his career profile, he was calm and philosophical on the eve of the fight. He said, "I appreciate what Clay's done for the box office, but tomorrow night at 9:30 will be equals. Before the night is much older, I expect to prove that the lip is a better talker than a fighter." Banter didn't stop at the weigh-in at the London Palladium when Clay, wearing a crown, the same one he would actually wear into the ring during his entrance. Cooper had overtrained and actually came in under his normal weight. He came in at a 180-pound limit. So one of his team actually inserted 2.5 pounds of lead plates into his boxing boots. Plus, he slipped him a lump of lead to conceal in each hand as well, which meant that he actually weighed in at 183.5 pounds against Clay's 207. After the official weigh-in was complete, Clay, well, he got up in Henry's face, didn't he? He was shouting and hollering at him, but Cooper remained unfazed. He then noticed a few little hairs sticking out of his chest, so he decided to pick one of them out. Shocked and in disbelief at what had just happened, Clay was silenced, but only for a while.
Well, into the fight, and Henry Cooper did start fast, something that he was actually unaccustomed to, taking the first 3 rounds. But Clay opened up a cut in the second to Henry's left eye, which worsened with persistent jabs. Moving into the 4th, and with seconds remaining, Cooper unleashed his Henry's hammer, bang, on Clay's jaw. Clay fell backwards onto the ropes and then down. He got up at the count of 4, and then the bell sounded. When Clay returned to his corner, Angelo Dundee did not hesitate in the use of smelling salts, even though it was forbidden under the jurisdiction of the British Boxing Board of Control. Dundee then brought attention to a small tear in Clay's left glove near the thumb, and he later admitted, "When he came to the corner, I gave him smelling salts, and I helped the split a little and pulled it to the side and made the referee aware there was a torn glove. I don't know how much time that got us, maybe a minute, but it was enough." The extended interval was 66 seconds, an extra 6 seconds made a difference as Clay actually recovered enough to pound away at Henry's left eye, which was pouring with blood. The referee, Tommy Little, had no option but to stop the fight. Clay's excuse for being knocked down at first was, I was looking at Cleopatra, Liz Taylor at ringside. But then he spoke seriously for a moment and he said, Cooper was great, the toughest I have met by a long, long way. The punch that put me down was the hardest one I have ever taken. He shook me up. He hit me harder than I've ever been hit. And then sometime after, he said, the punch that Cooper hit me with didn't just shake me, it shook my relations in Africa.
Absolutely brilliant quote from Clay at the time. Fantastic stuff. And 1 month later, and Sonny Liston now would defend his World Heavyweight Championship in a rematch against Floyd Patterson. Originally scheduled for Miami on Thursday, the April the 4th, 1963 at the Convention Hall, and promoted once again by the Boland brothers under the Championship Sports Incorporated banner. However, Liston actually twisted his right knee, so it was rescheduled to June and switched to Las Vegas, Nevada. It was then moved back a month to July the 22nd after Patterson had a benign tumour removed from his right hand. Liston retreated to the Thunderbird Hotel after refusing the arranged hospitalities at the Dunes, and by several accounts, by Sports Illustrated in particular, he was mean, stupid, and no good. He was pissed off. Of course he was. No one really gave a shit about him, so he's going to live up to that hype. And a woman actually described as a Los Angeles actress, whether she's true or not, this is what was rumoured by Sports Illustrated, who she didn't give her name either, interestingly, but this is what she said. She said, Liston has no feelings. He doesn't care about anyone or anything, just himself. I hope Patterson kills him. A blackjack dealer said that Liston kicked down a barricade outside the room where he was going to work out, and outside where people were lining up to pay to get in. Spectators paid to watch public workouts only to find out that he didn't feel like training. It was around this time that Liston had made acquaintances with a certain Irving Ash Resnick as well, who was very much a part of his team and sat right next to him. We have obviously spoken about him on the dark side of boxing and in Liston's career profile. So, you know, go and check out if you want some more details on Resnick. Now, while in Vegas, Liston was asked about a fight with Clay. He responded by saying rather unnervingly, Clay's demanding great big money. Reckon he would rather take somebody else, not me. Would rather go and visit in the graveyard and digging up them bums he's had so far. What do I do then? Maybe I go to the graveyard, dig some up myself.
During the evenings, Liston liked to play craps at the Thunderbird, when unexpectedly, Cassius Clay showed up shooting his mouth off. At a distance, Liston tolerated it, but he then made the mistake of getting in Liston's face. Liston apparently leaned over and said, Listen, you nigger faggot, if you don't get out of here in 10 seconds, I'm gonna pull that big tongue out of your mouth and stick it up your ass. Liston then showed Clay his gun to make sure he understood. And we have mentioned Clay's version, but let's do it again for this episode. And this is what Cassius Clay said. Suddenly he reached into his pocket and pulled out a long black pistol, pointed it straight at my head, pulled the trigger. Bang, bang. I ducked. A chill went through my spine. Bang, bang. He was still aiming at me. I leapt over the blackjack table, then the dice, the table, the chips were scattering, the cards were all over the floor, and I was ducking and dodging all the way out in the streets. And behind me I could hear the pistol. Bang, bang. Willie Reddish added that he suspected Clay would pull a stunt like that, so he gave Sonny a gun and loaded it with blanks. Some also suggest that on another day, Clay was still in the Thunderbird but didn't see Liston approach him. Liston tapped his shoulder, and as Clay turned around, he slapped his face with the back of his hand. Clay, taken aback, said, What did you do that for? Liston whispered, Because you're too fucking fresh. Clay walked away, and Liston mocked, I got the punk's heart now. The slap around the mouth story has actually been dismissed by Harold Conrad, a boxing promoter and scriptwriter, and he actually said, I was there. He, as in Sonny, didn't slap him, but he scared the shit out of him. You better believe it. He remembers asking Clay, Were you scared? And he replied, Yeah, man. A big ugly bear scared me bad.
I bet he did. There's so many mixed messages, what you wouldn't believe, but definitely the altercation on the crap tables happened. So scared or not, Cassius Clay still turned up at Liston's public workout, taunting the champion that he would fight him for $1 a head. The price fans actually paid at the door. Liston invited him into the ring. Clay, instead, he was restrained. He said, "I'm restrained by a nylon," and returned to his chair. So he was off and he sat back down. Clay and Liston then continued to taunt each other during the workout. Liston mocked, "You can't punch hard enough to break an egg." And Clay replied, "You just stand there and pretend you're an egg." From the back of the hall, Clay laughed and actually opened his eyes wide in that mock horror, that expression he used to do. And, "Hey, Liston, you're an animal. If ever you fight me, I won't know whether to whip you or cage you." Liston picked up the championship belt provided by the Ring magazine across his hands, and looking at Clay, he raised it above his head and said, "This is something you'll never get." Well, Jack Nylon actually called Clay. He said he called Clay a good fighter and a sharp monkey. He started yelling for a guaranteed payday of $1.5 million, but he will get no guarantees. Our offer is 20% of everything, but we shall probably wind up paying him about 23%. Already planning this fight, even though Patterson's second fight hadn't happened. So Nylon actually then said he probably would still give Clay, it work out to be £1 million. So this is the numbers in his head that he believed he would get. Nylon said that from this fight, he would be in control of all promotions. We control everything. All the dough goes to Liston. Other promoters are out as of now. As we know, this will change. He then said he believed a Liston Clay fight could gross $7 million on the gate and closed circuit. At the final press conference of Sonny Liston and Floyd Patterson, because that's who he was fighting in the rematch, the champ said he wanted to win inside 126 seconds. It took him the first time round. The only question is how fast I catch up with him, as in Patterson. If it takes me 5 rounds to knock him out, I must be riding a slow train.
Liston continued and said, "I'm the champion and I intend to remain that. I would like to be a busy one, just like Joe Louis. I may say some more about that as soon as this is over. Don't want to talk no more about it now." Well, the time for talking was done, but Clay's clowning around wasn't. Nearly 8,000 in the Las Vegas Convention Center stood and cheered Patterson into the ring, then booed and yelled abuse at the heavyweight champion of the world. Rocky Marciano, Joe Louis, and Billy Conn were announced to the crowd. Then Cassius Clay shook hands with Patterson, went across the ring to Liston, and stopped and dashed out in mock fear to applause and laughter. The bell rang for the first round when a voice from ringside shouted, "Last round, folks." Well, 10 blows landed. The 11th was a chopping right that sent Patterson down to the canvas. This time he was dazed, hurt and discouraged, but he did get up and fired a right hand and missed. Liston finished him off with 2 rights to the side of the head and a left hook to the jaw. Floyd Patterson was counted out by the referee Krause at an official time of 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Patterson had not landed a single punch out of 5, 3 jabs and 2 right hands. It lasted 4 seconds longer than the first fight. Joe Louis said, "Nobody gonna beat Liston except old age." Then, to muted cries of "We want Clay," Cassius Clay climbed into the ring and gave an interview and said, "It was a disgrace to the boxing game. It wasn't a heavyweight championship fight. It was just an eliminator to see who's going to fight me. If the bum whips me, I'll leave the country. Maybe after Liston, I'll go into the movies. After all, I'm the greatest actor there is."
So Billy Conn advised Clay not to fight Liston for at least 5 years. He said the longer you stay away from Liston, the better. Let that priest take care of him. When Cassius asked him, "What priest are you talking about?" Conn replied, "Father time." At the post-fight press conference, one writer actually asked, "Now you're on top of the world. Anything you want is yours. How does that feel?" And Liston replied, "It feels pretty good. But sometimes there are too many people bothering me." He was asked if Patterson was afraid of him, and Liston grinned. He said, "Yes, I think he is. He gave me that hurt look." Patterson was asked if he planned to put his beard on again on the way out of the building like he had done in his first defeat. So he put beard and glasses on, did he, to escape? And he replied that, "I do feel disgraced and terrible, but There will be no beard, no mustache, no nonsense this time. I came here so you wouldn't say I ducked out. Liston, who had earned an estimated $78,000, was asked about Cassius Clay. Who is Clay? It would take me 1.5 rounds to catch him and the other to knock him out. Later that evening, Liston, well, he was enjoying his victory party, of course, when Cassius Clay walked in and made his way through the crowd and straight to Sonny Liston's table. And he yelled at him. He said, "You're a sucker. My brother could have beaten Floyd Patterson." Liston, well, he humoured him. He said, "Come on over here and sit on my knee and finish your orange juice." It was all for show because they made out that they were going to go for each other, but they were obviously kept apart. But 48 hours after beating Patterson for the second time, Liston and Geraldine flew back to Denver, where they now lived because they had moved. This time at the airport, there were 1,500 people and the mayor and his wife to greet Liston for his rematch win. And Liston was just generally moved. He said, "I was thrilled. It's one of the nicest things that ever happened to me."
In September of 1963, Liston arrived in Britain, and according to Mickey Duff, Geraldine arrived with him but returned to Denver after a couple of days. When he was with Geraldine, Liston was respectful and kind, but when she was out of sight, he had a wandering eye, and Duff said, "Those engagements went well, but his temper was uneven, and his demands for female company became increasingly menacing. He had a tremendous magnetism that was quite astonishing, even to the point of taking women from their husbands." While in Britain, Liston was introduced to Reg Gutteridge, who was writing for the London Evening News at the time. Liston tapped him below the belt and Reg doubled over. Sonny said, "Take a bow." Reg recalled the evening he got his own back on Sonny, and he said, "They were at a bar in Scotland and a little tipsy when Liston asked, 'Why is it that you white guys think black guys look like gorillas?' Reg protested, 'Come on, I've never said anything like that in my life.' Sonny replied, 'Bullshit, man. You're just like all the other white guys. You think us blacks are just big hairy apes.' Liston was winding him up, but Gutteridge got flustered. Liston then said, 'I'll bet you any money you like that you've got more hairs on your goddamn leg than I have.' With that, he rolled up his trouser leg and showed 2 hairs. Gutteridge did the same and revealed a smooth, shiny, hairless and entirely false leg. The real one had actually been blown off by a mine in the Second World War. Liston actually burst out laughing and called him a cork-legged, limey son of a bitch before paying up. Gutteridge liked Liston, and he said, if you can be persuaded to believe this, he was actually a boy with a soft centre. He possessed that precious gift of sometimes being able to laugh at himself, although you had to be very careful when choosing your moment."
What a great story that was. Brilliant. And although we've spoken many times with they've had altercations already, we're actually going to move into the build-up of this now. Now, while Liston was champion, he gave money to ex-fighters like Joe Lewis, old welterweight champion, Johnny Saxton, who had also fallen on hard times, and 2 more who had actually gone blind. He also supported causes like cerebral palsy and gave his time to visit hospitals like one for disabled children in Allenstown, Pennsylvania. He said, "You think you've got it bad, you go there and you know you never had a dark day." Sonny Liston overruled his managers on the contract splits as well for the Clay fight, who were going to start the offer at 15%. They didn't even get to that point. Liston told them, "I got 12.5% to fight Patterson, but that was wrong. He gets the challenger's 20% share, and that is it." The fight contract was almost identical to the one that Patterson forced on all of his challengers, except this one made no mention of a rematch. Now, without Sonny Liston's knowledge, a second contract was actually signed and kept secret from the Miami Beach Boxing Commission. It included a provision that paid Clay an additional $50,000 in consideration for which Intercontinental acquired the right to promote Clay's next fight, name his opponent, and select the site if he were to defeat Sonny Liston. Well, there you go. So they obviously gone behind his back then. On November the 5th, 1963, Cassius Clay met Liston in Denver and they signed the contract to fight in front of the media, and Clay said, "Somebody pinch me. If I'm not asleep, this is a dream come true." After Clay tucked into a plate of chicken, as Liston looked on and he said, "You eat," Clay headed to the electric chair. Then at 1 a.m. that morning, Clay went to the Liston residence and stood outside shouting insults until the neighbours called the police. Clay had bought a red bus in Chicago, and across the top of the bus in the flamboyant colours read, "World's most colourful fighter," and below it, "Liston must go in 8.
When Sonny arrived home in Denver, Clay made an anonymous tip-off to newspapers, radio stations, and the police that he was going to break into Liston's residence at 2 a.m. Sure enough, they all showed up, and Clay remembered. He started yelling, "Oink, oink." Everybody heard. You know how them white people felt about that black man who had just moved in. We didn't help it much. Liston came out after the taunting, but before he could make up his mind what to do, the police told us to leave or we'd be arrested for disturbing the peace. He didn't leave straight away. First he carried on honking the horn on the bus and knocking on Sonny's door. All the while, Clay was on his lawn shouting about how he's going to whip Liston bad. Clay later claimed that Sonny smashed one of the bus windows in anger while he kept repeating, "You big ugly bear, a policeman and those dogs saved you. You no champ, you a chump. You gonna fall in 8, because I'm the greatest." The fight was agreed when they signed the contract, but the war was well and truly underway. A wealthy businessman, William B. McDonald Jr. from Miami, decided that he wanted to promote the World Heavyweight Championship between Liston and Clay. He was approached by Chris Dundee and told that he could make an easy $1 million on the fight. McDonald bought the rights to promote the fight from Intercontinental Promotions Inc., the company owned by Jack Nylon. He then paid Intercontinental $625,000 for the live promotion, but did not buy the TV theatre rights. With more than 1 million seats available for the closed-circuit screening across the United States, it was, of course, a mistake.
Yeah, big mistake. And McDonald actually said that with other expenses, he needed to raise $800,000 from the live gate to break even. But the best he could do with his full price sellout was 100,000 profit. And that's if all the tickets went. He was so rich, though, it basically didn't matter to him. I think he said something like it was good for Miami. Interestingly, though, very interestingly, prize fighting was still illegal in Florida. So McDonald and Dundee actually found a way around that situation by declaring that the occasion was actually sponsored by the Veterans of Foreign Wars charity, which was the VFW. McDonald and Dundee paid the organisation a mere $500. They did give away 20 ringside tickets to the VFW members. This allowed the Miami Commission to license the fight. Liston arrived in Miami 4 weeks before the fight. He was taken from the plane to an electric cart across the tarmac to the VIP room. Clay, of course, was training as usual in Angelo Dundee's 5th Street gym. He made sure he was there to greet Sonny Liston by running after the cart across the tarmac. The girl driving the car actually stalled it. Liston got out, telling McDonald he was going to break Clay's arms. McDonald pleaded and persuaded him to get back into the car, and they drove away, of course, with Cassius Clay still yelling and chasing after him. Harold Conrad was with the Liston public relations team. He said Liston completely overlooked Clay, so instead of training, he concentrated on other hobbies. Conrad said he thought he was invincible. He scared Patterson just by looking at him. And here comes this big mouth kid. He didn't train at all for that fight. He worked out a little, went to the gym. He would hang out at the beauty parlor, hanging on some of the chicks, apparently. I'll tell him, this kid is big and strong, he's fast and can hit. Liston's answer was, "Are you kidding? I'll scare the shit out of that N-word faggot. I'll scare the shit out of him at the weigh-in, and I'll put the iron on him." So Jack McKinney actually felt the same, and he said Sonny thought all he had to do was take his robe off and Clay would just faint. He made the colossal misjudgment. He didn't train at all.
Harry Carpenter asked if Clay's psychological tactics were getting under his skin, and Liston replied, You even hear that saying, whistling in the dark. You know what a small boy does walking through a graveyard at night when he's scared? He whistles. Well, that's Clay. He's just a little boy in the dark and he's scared. Liston agreed to press workouts at the Surfside Civic Centre, and afterwards he answered some questions. He was pressed for a prediction and he said 3 rounds would be enough. The poor guy can't fight. That's why he talks so much. Someone mentioned that he might be ring rusty, and Liston answered jokingly, "Geez, how good do I have to be? If I knock him out any quicker, the other guy won't even show up. The less I fight, the better I get. You say I've won 3 fights in 3 rounds in 3 years. So okay. So after next week, it'll be 4 fights in 4 rounds in 4 years." Joe Louis certainly felt that this could be an issue, and he said, "A fighter has to fight regularly to be at his best." Jack Dempsey found that out the hard way, and so did I. After a tough sparring session, Clay declared himself satisfied, and he said, "I believe in myself so much, it's embarrassing. My fight will be to hit and not get hit. I can't be beat. No one can beat me." Clay continued to trash talk in the weeks leading up to the fight, and he said, "After I finish with Liston, he'd rather run through hell in a gasoline sports coat than fight me again." He told reporters, "If Liston beats me, I'll crawl across the ring, kiss his feet, and take a jet out of the country." Someone replied, "What would you really do?" Clay paused for a moment, and he smiled, and he said, "I'll go to my dressing room, collect my money, and go home."
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Cassius Marcellus Clay. He's young, he's handsome. They know it. He's a poet, and many people believe he'll be the next heavyweight champion of the world. Cassius, can I ask you how you're feeling now at this point of your training?
I'm feeling great. I'm ready to go to war right now.
Well, when you say you're ready to go to war right now...
If I see that barrel in the street, I'll beat him before the fight.
You'd actually take him on before the fight?
Beat him like I'm his daddy.
I saw Sonny Liston a few days ago, Cassius.
Ain't he ugly? He's too ugly to be the world's champ. The world's champ should be pretty like me.
Well, he told me to bet my life that you wouldn't go 3 rounds.
Well, if you want to lose your money, then bet on Sunday.
Oh, may I ask you
Because
this?
I'll never lose a fight. It's impossible. Tell him. It's impossible.
Never lost a fight in your life.
Ask any of my fans when was the last time they lost. I'm too fast.
Champion from
I'm
the
the
crib.
king. Born the champ.
Born the champ from the crib. Ah!
What percentage do you feel will be coming to see you?
Well, 100% will be coming to see me, but 99% will be coming to see me get beat.
You really feel that?
Because they think I talk too much.
Willie Pastrano, the world light heavyweight champion who trained in the 5th Street gym under the guidance of Angelo Dundee, gave Clay a chance of victory. He said Cassius might be scared and tense at the start, but when he finds Liston slow and easy to hit, he will box him like a dream. Angelo Dundee said if Clay followed instructions, he had the ability to take out Liston late in the fight. He said, "We have many assets." He then went on to give detailed breakdown to Tex Moore of his Sports Illustrated, and this is what he said. He said, "Clay has a style Liston has never seen before. He is much faster than Liston. He has the faculty of getting under Liston's skin, and he will not be browbeaten by him. Cassius respects the champion, but really deep down inside himself, Clay thinks he is unbeatable."
Can you make a serious prediction of how far you think the fight's going to go, Sonny?
Well, it's pretty hard to say because I think that he's going to try to run.
See?
He's going to try to...
He said to have had a lot of speed, but you move around pretty good yourself. You think you can catch him all right?
I don't think he can beat me running, but I do think that he's going to run some. They put a mouthpiece in his mouth where he can't talk. I'm going to kill him.
Sonny isn't hard to hit. We can hit him with uppercuts, left and rights. Cassius is the only heavyweight champion of the world with a good left uppercut. If you built a prototype of what kind of fighter can whip Liston, you couldn't improve on Clay. He hits hard and moves. He has every punch in the book. We can knock Liston out in the 11th or 12th round by wearing him down with the quantity of punches, if Cassius will do what he is told. So there's a detailed breakdown there by Angelo Dundee.
Clay then finished off by saying, "I'll uppercut him stupid. I'll upset the world. I talk too much to lose." This was the first time that Clay and Bundini Brown would rhyme the most famous words in public. Ain't no light heavyweight fast enough to catch me. I'm the fastest heavyweight who ever lived. I am the greatest. And with Bundini Brown, he would chant in perfect unison, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, and rumble, young man, rumble. Then, staring at each other, they would roar. McDonald's publicist Al Taylor explained the biggest problem they had when promoting the fight. Clay was increasingly supportive to the Nation of Islam, and at one point, he was begged by the promoters to keep his beliefs private until after the fight. But he was young and a naive personality, so he left camp and flew to New York for a black Muslim meeting. The Miami Herald leaked the story, which infuriated McDonald because he felt paying Clay for his services, he was helping finance the Nation of Islam, and it would very nearly lead to the fight being called off. Ticket sales took a drumming because of the bad publicity Clay received due to his links to the Nation of Islam. Los Angeles columnist Jim Murray highlighted this and the public feeling towards Liston, a man with a record of armed robbery, women scaring and cop beating, is the sentimental favourite. The villain is the pretty one for a change. Liston gets the white hat. Murray explained that was because black supremacists are just as big as an affront to humanity as white supremacists. To maintain hype in the fight, the promoters brought the Beatles into the gym to meet Cassius Clay, who happily played around with them for the cameras. Clay said to John Lennon, "You ain't as dumb as you look," to which Lennon jokingly replied, "No, but you are."
So jazz and blues fan Sonny Liston was actually taken to see the Beatles play himself, but he wasn't impressed at all, asking, "Is this what all the people are screaming about? My dog plays drums better than that kid with a big nose." Well, Jim Jacobs, he arrived in Clay's gym with the TV cameras and introduced the challenger to the viewers. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Cassius Marcellus Clay. He's young, he's handsome." "They know it," interrupted Clay. Jacobs then continued, "He's a poet, a prophet, and many people think he will be the next heavyweight champion of the world. I saw Sonny Liston a few days ago, Cassius, and..." "Ain't he ugly?" interrupted Clay again. This time, he took over. "He's too ugly to be the champ. The champ should be pretty like me." Jacobs tried to intervene, but Clay and Bundini Brown, well, they took off on one of their rants, as they normally do. He declared that 100% of the people in the crowd were coming to see him, and 99% wanted to see him get beaten. He then said, "They think I talk too much. I am the resurrector. I am the saviour of the boxing world." Well, during Sonny Liston's workout, Clay paid him a visit, began mocking the champ, then climbed into the roped off area and Liston chased after him. Jack Nillan actually threw himself between the pair and Cassius scrambled through the ropes to the amusement of everybody who laughed. It even brought a smile out of Sonny Liston, but just for a brief second. Clay's rhymes were now in full flow. "You are 40 if you are a day, and you don't belong in the ring with Cassius Clay."
Who's going to win the fight?
Yeah.
Clay. What? Sonny Liston. I don't think you know what you're talking about. You don't know a thing about fights.
Liston has never proved that he could go 15 rounds.
Ah, what are you
Where
talking
Clay
about?
has.
Ah, you're out of your mind.
You say Liston has never fought nobody? Well, who did this guy ever
Mike
fight?
DeJong got knocked out while he was on the floor. He's counting himself out. He took the
who did
referee's
that?
hand and counted himself out.
Give me a chance. Who did this guy ever fight?
Who?
Yeah.
Clay?
Yeah.
He boxed London.
London. Box who?
Peter Cooper. I mean, what's
Peter
his name?
Cooper. You can lick Peter
What's it?
Cooper.
Liston's too powerful. I'll knock him out in the second round. And Clay will be scared of death.
Liston will kill him. He'll kill him in the first round. It'll be Liston in 3 rounds. Okay, Liston in about 4. Liston by 2.
2. Liston in 3.
First round. 1, Liston. 1, Liston. Second round, Liston. Liston in 4.
During another television interview, Cassius said this rhyme. Clay comes out to meet Liston, and Liston starts to retreat. If he goes back any further, he'll be in a ringside seat. Who would have thought when they came to the fight that they would witness the launching of a human satellite? They did not dream when they put down their money that they would see a total eclipse of the sun. Now, Jack Nylon asked the Miami Commission for the fighters to weigh in separately because he was actually concerned that it might kick off before the bell, and he said, Liston is angry, and he might knock out the kid when they get to the scales. The commissioners felt something unpredictable might happen. They said there was no reason to change tradition, therefore the boxers weighed in, one after the other, in the same room. Some estimated that 500 people showed up to the weigh-in. Clay and Bundini Brown walked in bellowing, "Ready to rumble!" The moment Liston appeared, Clay went for the jugular and he said, "I'll take you on right now. I can beat you any time, you chump. You're a sucker. You don't have a chance. You think you're something and I'm nothing. I am the greatest. I am the king. I can whoop any man in the world. I float like a butterfly, sting like a bee." Looking on was Teddy Brenner, the Madison Square Garden matchmaker, who said, "My God, he's scared to death. This kid is out of his mind. He might not show up for the fight." The head of Clay's syndicate, Bill Faversham, held him around the waist, while Sugar Ray Robinson had an arm. Then Bundini started whispering in Clay's ear and he said, "Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee." Faversham snapped, "For Christ's sakes, Drew, shut up, will you?" Liston remained silent, but gave Clay that stare, which Cassius responded to. "Who are you looking at, you big ugly bear?"
Well, Clay, he continued to go Liston throughout the weigh-in, but the champ did not retaliate at all. But once complete and both fighters made their way out, a member of the Miami Commission announced over the microphone, "Clay is fined $2,500. However, the fine was actually reduced to $1,000 and it was paid by his syndicate. Clay said sometime later, "I didn't make no sound that wasn't planned to keep him thinking in that rut. I wanted him thinking that all I was some clown. The more out of shape and overconfident I could get him, the better." Well, in an interesting twist, Sonny Liston actually refused to sign a deal unless TNT, which was the television network, guaranteed there would be no segregation in seating, that is the closed circuit venues. This meant that 3 cinemas who had actually intended to have whites only audience actually cancelled their plans to screen the fight. They were in Jackson, Mississippi, Waco, Texas, and Montgomery, Alabama. So James Farmer, the national director of the Congress on Racial Equality, actually praised Liston for taking a stand. The fight would be replayed or relayed live to listeners in Japan, Italy, France, Germany, South America, Sweden, the Philippines. So Rocky Marciano's ghostwriter actually credited him with this analyst, and he said, "In 2 years, Liston has never been hurt. I don't suppose Liston has even taken a real punch in his life because there's nobody to hand it out. Clay has the same assets as Ray Robinson, magnificent legs. He'll need them to keep away. Folks are feeling a bit flat because everyone is fed up with Cassius Clay and his non-stop yapping. He has lost that knight in shining armor image, and folks want to see him well and truly licked."
Angelo Dundee believed Clay had a chance, referring specifically to the Eddie Machen fight, and he said, "He, as in Liston, is a one-way fighter. He can't lick a two-way, let alone a four-way fighter, a guy that can go forward and back and side to side, a fellow that can go side to side and can beat him." Joe Louis was predominantly in Liston's corner, and he partly agreed with Marciano by saying, "Liston has the killer instinct and Clay has only to make that one mistake Sonny needs." After watching Clay work out, he said, "I don't know what Cassius has got to win with. He just runs around in circles. Cassius has got to be kidding. If he fights like that, pulling away the way he does, Sonny will knock him through the front door." Ray Robinson was also pals with Cassius, and he was never in doubt, and he said, "Clay will win by a knockout. His speed will be the decisive factor." Rocky Graziano was with Ray Robinson on his assessment when he said, "This Liston is just a baby. He was overmatched twice with Floyd Patterson. Irving Cohen, my manager, would never make the mistake of putting him in with a fellow as ferocious as Cassius." Jack Dempsey gave Clay a good chance and he said, "I think Clay is a much better fighter than people think. I give him a good chance to win." After the former legends gave their predictions, 62 writers polled their opinions, but only 3 out of 62 actually went for a Cassius Clay win. Bob Waters of the Newsday went for a Clay stoppage, and Leonard Copper of the New York Times and Bill Wise of the True magazine both said Clay on points. Clay was a nervous mess before the fight. He even began to turn on his own people, and he said, "I don't trust you," he told Ferdy Pacheco. "You want Liston to win. You bet with gangsters." Then he turned to Dundee and said, "I don't trust mafia people. You're a bunch of Italian mafia people." Ferdy believed Cassius was deadly serious when he said those things, because he said he was very nervous. You could see it.
I bet he was. So there was a message from the gods, an omen that was missed or just a coincidence, whatever you believe in. At Miami's Hyman race track, indeed, this is where it was. A 3-year-old horse named Cassius won for the first time, a 19-2 shot on February the 25th, 1964. A crowd of 8,300 spectators gathered at the Convention Hall Arena in Miami Beach to see if Cassius Clay could put his money where his mouth was. High ticket prices, rain, and the likelihood of a mismatch left most of the hall's 16,000 seats empty. The announced crowd was later revised and reduced by 2,000, and the live gate was far short of McDonald's $825,000 break-even point. So, he lost money. In the lobby, a group of FBI and Secret Service agents scanned the crowd for known underworld members. Clay was first into the ring. According to the New York Yankees legend Yogi Berra, he had to wait 7 or 8 minutes before Liston finally appeared. And when Liston entered the ring with his trainer Willie Reddish, he actually wore a t-shirt advertising the Thunderbird Hotel, Las Vegas. The athletic director of the Thunderbird, Ash Resnick, was also in his corner. As Felix gave, this is the referee, Felix gave the fighters instructions, Cassius Clay experienced the menacing glare of Sonny Liston and recalled the moment sometime later. "I won't lie, I was scared. Sonny Liston was one of the greatest fighters of all time. He was one of the most scientific boxers who ever lived. He hit hard and he was fixing to kill me. It frightened me, just knowing how hard he hit. I was there. I didn't have no choice but to go out and fight."
Cassius Clay said to me, "Angelo, I got a surprise for you." I said, "What's that?" He said, "I'm going to bring Drew Brown here." I said, "Don't do that. The guy will drive me up a wall. Don't do that." I begged him not to bring him. So he brought, no, he won't get in your way, Aunt. Don't worry about it. He's a nice guy. He's a lot of fun. So he brought him, and he was right. Drew was great. Drew added something to Muhammad. He added a new dimension. Kept him loose as a goose. He was loose anyhow. But Drew added something. Drew was a very important facet of Muhammad Ali's life.
Sonny figured that he was a loudmouth kid trying to build his ego up because we figured he was scared to death. And that was the attitude the whole camp had, that Cassius Clay was scared to death. And that it would only be a matter of time before Sonny stopped him from talking.
So now we are going to move into the fight details and the round-by-round analysis of how this fight went down. Of course, you can catch these fights on YouTube that we are talking about, but we are going to go through the description of how the fight played out. So in round number 1, Clay danced and backpedaled away from Liston's powerful advances, as expected, while he was delivering quick and punishing jabs to Liston's head. Liston only had one thing in his mind, and he said, "I was trying to knock him out from the first bell." He swung and he missed his elusive target. "Man, he meant to kill me. I ain't kidding," remembered Clay, who was moving away, but then towards the end of the round, he landed a sharp right that connected solidly. He then threw a barrage of punches that had the crowd roaring. Willie Reddish, was calling to Liston to shorten his punches, to narrow his stance, while Clay kept a wide stance, popping off that jab and moving. The crowd was cheering so loudly that the bell rang 3 times before the fighters finally heard it several seconds later. In those few seconds, Liston had aggravated his left shoulder, pulling muscles as he swung for the kill. It was an injury that had plagued him throughout training. By this point, Sonny was already feeling the effects of a torn shoulder muscle that was beginning to hemorrhage. He returned to his corner, complaining of numbness in his left arm. He refused to sit down between rounds and looked pissed off because he knew he had underestimated Clay and was embarrassed by it. In the other corner, the 22-year-old Clay was thinking, "He was supposed to kill me. Well, I'm still alive.
Moving into the second round, and the second was a lot quieter, but Clay spent, for the most part of it, keeping away once again from Liston, similar to the first, who landed a good shot to the body. He missed with a right hook that would have hurt me, but that was when he got me with a right to the stomach, and that was what Cassius Clay remembered. However, he rode it, and he kept dancing until Sonny landed a long left at the 2-minute mark that Clay said rocked him back. He said he really staggered me for a minute. In fact, he did more damage with that than any other punch. The fight was now delicately poised and even on all 3 official scorecards. So moving into the third, and the action got more interesting in this round as Clay taunted Liston at the start. Bear, you know you can't fight. Let's see you get away from this one. You're losing your title, Bear. Then Clay rocked Liston with a right hand. His speed and long raking blows had the champ banging trouble. The jab was doing the most damage. Then suddenly a quick left-right combination had Liston leaking blood from beneath his left eye. However, Liston showed something in the second half. He came back with body punches, his own jab and some clubbing rights as Clay moved away from danger. Was the fight back on? Not by some accounts.
After the third round, Rocky Marciano turned to his radio partner Howard Cosell and said, "Jesus Christ, Howie, he's become an old man." In Liston's corner, Ash Resnick recalled, "When I saw Sonny in the third round, I said, my God, this isn't Sonny Liston in that ring. This is an old man that can't fight. It even looked to me like Sonny's hair had got grey. And you know, that happens with fighters. When they go fast. They go really fast. And it looked like the same thing had happened to Sonny." Now moving into round 4, Clay for the most part kept it on the move, hands down as normal, using excellent head movement to avoid Liston's jabs, but he was reluctant to be involved. Liston kept plodding forward, unable to cut the ring off, but landing punches, although missing some too. Angelo Dundee remembered that he was throwing his left hand so hard that his fist turned when he missed. When you punch that hard and miss, you wear yourself out. 2 of Sonny's jabs landed flush, but Clay took them well, and now knew that Liston's power had been compromised. He continued to jab at Sonny's cut and made it worse, but there wasn't any real indication that his eyes were bothering him, apart from some occasional blinks. In the corner at the end of the round, an agitated Clay screamed at Angelo Dundee, "Cut my gloves off! Please cut them off! I mean it, I'm blind! Dirty work of foot! Dirty work of foot!" He wanted the world to know that somebody had pulled a stunt, that something was fixed.
Right, especially was stinging from some kind of solution. Dundee was always convinced it was simply the same solution that Joe Polino had used on Sonny's cut that was obviously still bleeding quite bad at this point, and it had somehow got into Clay's eyes. Dundee actually threw the sponge and the towel away and wiped his fighter with new ones. Clay after the fight that, "I thought your guys were going to kill me. They thought I had done something to the water." Dundee said he saved himself by drinking some of the water and rubbing it into his eyes to show them that it was safe. Freddie Pacheco was actually sitting with a group of black Muslims who were supporting Cassius Clay, and he actually overheard them say that they were saying that they were going to get Angelo after the fight. They had always warned nothing had better happened to Cassius. They gave Angelo an awful time. Dundee told the referee, Barney Felix, there must be a liniment on Sonny's gloves. So he walked over to Sonny's corner and smelt them. He said, "No liniment, Angie," Felix told Dundee. Barney Felix said that as they stood in the corner and still trying to put Clay's mouthpiece in, he was about a second or 2 away from actually stopping the fight. Clay actually raised both arms to signal that he wanted to quit, which almost forced the stoppage even more, but Felix shouted, "Damn it, Clay, get out there." While Clay's corner was in disarray, so was Sonny's. His left arm was really hindering his performance.
Jack Nylon told a congressional committee investigating the fight a month later, "I knew it was getting progressively worse, but I thought that sooner or later Sonny would beat this boy with one hand. I honestly believed in my heart." Bill Caton said, "People have scoffed at the shoulder story, but if you watch the tapes as I have, you can see Liston never once threw a leveraged left hand. He couldn't throw his left hand at all. He was pushing it." So now we move back to the fight and into round 5, and Liston ploughed forward, chasing, missing mostly but landing sometimes, and Clay kept wheeling around the ring, buying himself recovery time, and he managed to do it. So into round 6, and by that 6th round, Clay's eyes had cleared, his jab was working again, and Liston looked terribly tired, not to mention old. The champion was painfully slow on his feet and slow to react. A barrage of 7 unanswered punches peppered Liston, but he continued to stand off. He took jab after biting jab as Clay picked him off in his own time. At the bell, Clay had that jaunty swagger back. Liston trudged to his corner, a ridge of flesh under his right eye, that cut on his left still visible. In his corner, he had said something to Willie Reddish. Jack Nylon was learning through the ropes, and it became clear that something serious was happening. Reddish touched Liston's shoulder. Sonny seemed uninterested, but his facial expressions were never a reliable guide to what was going on in his head. Then the referee, Arnie Felix, was called over to the huddled group, and after some discussion, he turned and spread his arms to signal the end.
Well, by that point, Cassius Clay was already on his feet, early for the 7th that would never come, and he spotted what was happening before anyone else in his corner, and probably before most in the hall. He raised his arms, he shuffled and danced. Then as his people dived between the ropes to congratulate him, he opened his mouth and eyes wide, almost in disbelief, and raced over to the ropes to celebrate and yelled to the ringside reporters, "I shook the world, I shook the world."
Yeah, I'm through talking. I don't have to talk no more. I done proved my point. All I have to do is just be a nice, clean gentleman, that's all. I don't like to fight. You notice the way I hit and move. I mean, I don't like to get hit. And I don't like hurting people. All of you all were wrong. You didn't know what you're talking about. I always knew how hard he hit, and I always knew that he couldn't hit me. That's why I talk so bold. And I knew that you all didn't know what you're talking about. My mouth has overshadowed my ability.
In the first round, I felt that my arm, I don't know whether it left me or I know it went out. It was one of those things that happened.
Do you expect to get a rematch?
Well, if Clay want to give me a rematch, and if he don't, I imagine I'll forget it.
So the 3 judges, this is the 3 judges' scores, if you ever wanted to know. Felix scored it to the referee 57-57. Lovett was 58-57 to Liston, funny enough, and Jacobson 59-56 to Clay. Not that any of that mattered, but if you was interested, that's what it was. Many felt that Liston had given up and he got bad press anyway, but it was no different to him. He had still lost his heavyweight title. Rumours have surfaced that Liston's plan was to have cutman Joe Polino smear the solution onto his gloves and shoulders if the fight lasted more than 3 rounds. Nobody witnessed it. Previous opponents, Cleveland Williams, rubbished it. Eddie Matron was sure of it, and Polino allegedly confessed to it many years later in a conversation with Jack McKinney. Angelo Dundee diffused any suggestion of deliberate attempting to blind Clay. He said it was an unfortunate accident. They are too nice and too fair to resort to such tactics. Liston dismissed Clay's claim that of the liniment on the gloves. He said, "I don't see how he could say that, because if it was on my gloves, it could have gotten onto his and into my face. Didn't have any trouble getting anything into my eyes." But I suppose the biggest question is, did it all happen? Was it actually fixed or not, Sean?
This is something we have spoke about before with Sonny Liston and his career, when we spoke about Muhammad Ali's career profile briefly. And I think, just to sort of reiterate our stance on it, I think there were too many people that were there at the time and their accounts of what happened at the time that pretty much rubbished the fact that this was not a deliberate incident. They think it was because of the Eddie Machin fight. Eddie Machin obviously was blinded in the same fashion. But for me, the people that were there were the people that mattered. The people that witnessed it were the people that have a best placed opinion on it, other than us speaking about it many years later. So I'd go with what the majority say, which is it wasn't a deliberate incident. It was an incident that occurred. It was an accident. And I think if most of the well-known people involved in that fight have rubbished it away, then you kind of got to go with that, haven't you?
I agree with you, mate. I don't have really much more to add to it, other than the fact I don't think this was. I think there's probably more to be raised in the second fight, but for me, not for me. It was more of an accident.
Well, Harold Conrad and his wife went to see Liston. He was in his bed and under medication, and he asked, "What are they saying out there? What are they saying?" Conrad replied that people felt he dumped the fight. Liston threw a glass against the wall and yelled, "Don't they know what that title meant to me? You see me? You know what it means to me to hear a kid say, 'Hello, champ.'" Johnny Tocco, the Las Vegas gym owner who had worked with Liston and knew how the mob worked, said Sonny was tired, so he quit. Clay was persuaded by Angelo Dundee to give the traditional post-fight interview to writers by saying, "Hypocrites, I shouldn't be talking to you. Well, I'm still pretty and he's in the hospital. I'll fight anybody the public wants me to fight now. Boy, I whipped him bad. I tried to tell the world it was going to happen, but you didn't listen. Hypocrites, hypocrites, hypocrites." Bundini Brown laughed and sang out, "Hail the champion!" "Say it again," replied the champion, and together they yelled, "Hail the champion!" Clay moved on from the convention centre to Hampton House, a Miami hotel, for what he termed a private party with some friends. Among them, to nobody's surprise, was Malcolm X. But the day after Cassius Clay beat Sonny Liston, it was announced by Elijah Muhammad before the gathering of 5,000 followers in Chicago that the new heavyweight champion of the world was a member of the Nation of Islam. On March the 6th, Elijah renamed him Muhammad Ali, and he spoke to the press and said, "I go to a Muslim meeting, and what do I see? I see there is no smoking and no drinking, and the women wear their dresses down to the floor. I come out and you tell me I shouldn't go in there. Well, there must be something in there. I know the truth, and I don't have to be what you want me to be."
So Ferdy Pacheco, he gave his opinion on Ali's connections with the Nation of Islam, and we see some more information future sort of moving on when Ali obviously doesn't decide to go to the army and stuff. So we have done a lot of that on our legendary night with the fight of the century, Ali and Frazier. So if you want a bit more about that, then you can. But this is what Ferdy's opinion was. And he said the Muslims who saw value in stirring up the nation's racial wars by having Ali thrown out of boxing. Yet when Ali refused induction, it was the Muslims who betrayed him. They realised they had cut the golden goose's neck and were now expected to support him. The Honourable Elijah Muhammad, trying to cut his losses through Ali out of the Muslims, bade him from using his Muslim name, barred him from his mosques, and even denied him the right to speak to fellow Muslims. The last prescription was patently stupid. At the first hint of a prospective fight, that restriction was quickly lifted. It's just a point. I think you're just making a point there that they were hypocrites themselves, as Ali was called in the press. The Florida State Attorney, Richard Johnston, initiated an investigation into the fight, focusing on Sonny Liston's injury, but also possible match fixing. The Boxing Commission in Sonny's home state, Colorado, was actually suspended him immediately after the fight. After a meeting with the IRS, who again took loads of money from this fight, Sonny held an impromptu press conference, and he admitted he was out of shape for the fight and that living the high life of a champion had made him very complacent. "I knew when the left went dead in the first round that I couldn't punch hard. He's just an average guy." That's what Sonny said of Ali. And most of all, has a lot of luck with him. So he didn't really praise him at all. He said it was down to him. Asked if he wanted a rematch, and Sonny said, "Yes, by all means, I'd like to meet him. Just as soon as my arm gets well and I can give it a test, I'd like to make it my next fight. I wouldn't fight him the same way. I would fight him much smarter. If I fight him again, I'd just try and catch him in a corner where he couldn't get away."
Liston was arrested for driving 76 miles per hour in a 30-mile-per-hour residential zone, and also for carrying a loaded .22 caliber revolver. It took several police officers to put handcuffs on Sonny, and they just barely fit around his wrists. Liston supposedly admitted to drinking half a bottle of vodka. Liston was fined another $600 after pleading guilty to speeding and given a 30-day suspended sentence. The investigation revealed no evidence that the fight had been fixed, and Gerstein's office found no fluctuation in the betting odds anywhere in the country. A month on from the fight, Michigan Senator Philip Hart's subcommittee on antitrust and monopoly met to determine whether boxing should be under federal control. By the end of the hearing, several senators were incensed by what they had learned, one of them calling it a shocking illustration of how a championship fighter unversed in the ways of the business and finance, can fall prey to the very persons who pretend to be his friends and his intimate advisors. On September the 14th, the fighters signed contracts for a November 16th rematch at the Boston Garden. Without Sonny's knowledge, Intercontinental entered into another agreement with the Louisville sponsoring group. ICP paid Ali $90,000 for the right to promote his next fight if he beat Liston in the rematch. That meant that Sonny now owned 22.5% of a promotional company betting on him to lose. Ali became the first fighter in history to sign a contract using two different names. He criticised the press several times for continuing to call him by what he said was his slave name. And he said, "Let's get this understood right now," he told reporters. "My name is Muhammad Ali, not Cassius Clay." Before the signing, the two fighters engaged in what may be their longest recorded conversation.
And this is how that conversation went. So, Ali, if I get beat, I'm going to retire. Liston, he says he's going to hang up the gloves. He can start driving the nail right now. He should be arrested for impersonating a prize fighter. What was the impersonating in Miami Beach? WBA would be investigated. Who got to investigate them? Same people always investigating me, said Sonny. Sonny was asked why Ali was frowning. He knows what he's in for. Ali dropped his head to his chest and then began to snore. He's getting used to doing that. No, I don't say I'm the greatest anymore. That wouldn't be right. I'm humble, but I'm still the most colourfulest. You got to call me Muhammad Ali because the messenger of God, Elijah Muhammad, gave me that name. Liston then replied to him, "I'm not fighting no Ala Molly. I met him as Cassius Clay, and that's the way I'm going to leave him." And Ali just said he just doesn't understand. Normally, Ali would go nuts at something like that. But was actually installed as a 13-5 favourite, which made Ali an even bigger underdog than Patterson in the first fight. Liston began training. Actually spent 3 months at the Sergeant Stanley Zimmering's Martial Arts Club in South Denver, where they worked on a regime of conditioning exercises to strengthen and repair his left shoulder and upper arm. Before he left Denver, Sonny said that his left shoulder was fully healed. The camp was strained though, as Willie Reddish was now being edged out by Zimmering, and the new guy in camp, Zimmering, actually told the press that, "I'll tell you this, physically he's ready for this one. 5.5 miles of road work every morning. No fighter likes the road work, but Sonny is out in front of that house every morning waiting for me."
Mark Cram also noticed the difference, and he said there was something crawling through his mind in Denver, something that smouldered beneath that thick layer of bitterness. It permeated Liston's camp. You could feel it, and it made you wonder what kind of a man will be facing Clay for this second time. Liston boxed more than 170 rounds preparing for this bout, almost twice his total for the first fight. His workouts included 6 rounds of sparring, 6 minutes on the bag, 9 minutes on the speed bag, and 9 minutes jumping rope. "Ain't no playing this time," said Sonny. He even gave longer interviews to the press, and he said, "Just a title, just that championship, that's all there is in the world. That title, my title, is there, and I'm going to get it, and I'm going to keep it a long time, and I'm going to like it, and with it, I won't be lonely." Liston had studied the films of the first fight for hours and saw something that would help him. He wouldn't talk about it, but in one sparring session, Liston landed 3 hard right-hand leads. It was the kind of adjustment that Ali wouldn't have expected Sonny to be capable of making. "Liston always was a predictable fighter," said Custy Amato. "He isn't now. He's changed." This time, it was Ali living the life of a champion and taking his opponent lightly. He had gotten married and gone on an 8,000-mile trip to Africa and the Middle East, where he received the warmest reception a visiting American ever received. He had also eaten himself out of shape for the first time in his life, and when he looked at his 245-pound body in the mirror, he thought of Jackie Gleason. After getting his weight down to 217 pounds, Muhammad claimed it had been health fat, as we always do. Even now, as adults, we always call it health fat.
When Ali actually arrived in Boston, his red Cadillac had been replaced with a black limousine driven by a Nation of Islam chauffeur. And as Liston pulled up for the medical, Ali and his entourage surrounded the car, shouting to Sonny to come out and be caught. Sonny was actually escorted inside by the state police, and when inside, the doctor actually called Sonny a freak because his reflexes and physical condition were as sharp as Ali's after he'd done his medical. That's where obviously they bumped into each other, and despite the sizable gap in their ages, because I think he said Sonny was clearly over 40 at this point. When Liston drove away, Ali sprinted after his car. Ali worried about a plot to somehow cheat him out of the title when he talked of flying in United Nations observers as insurance. Ali said, I expect dirty stuff. The referee, the judge, newspaper men, everybody is against me. If I'm going to lose, it's going to be fair and square. So I'm going to have the cameras on everyone and both corners and ringside. After cancelling a workout, Ali actually went back to his hotel room. He dropped a glass of water that shattered on the bathroom floor. I ain't suspicious, he said to Angelo Dundee, but I wonder if that's a bad omen. Ali ate a large meal and was watching Little Caesar on a projector, and he was overcome with nausea and began to vomit. Muhammad Ali had actually suffered an incarcerated hernia. Ali was actually rushed to hospital where a 3-doctor surgical team from Harvard University performed surgery. Ali had known about the hernia condition for months leading up to this scheduled rematch. Doctors said if Ali had been in the ring when the hernia had actually occurred, that he might have died. His aim was obviously to have the operation after the rematch. Sonny and Geraldine had just returned from a long walk with Reddish and Harold Conrad, and they were given the news, and Geraldine apparently cried. Conrad remembered looking at Sonny and seeing a man get old in front of his eyes. Liston said, I don't believe it. That faggot. It's another one of his tricks.
By all accounts, Ali got a lucky escape. That the Boston rematch was cancelled because Angelo Dundee admitted that Ali was in much better shape for the delayed fight. Author Paul Gallagher explained, it's not that much of a stretch to say Ali's hernia may have saved his own life, but that it actually eventually killed Liston. With so many conspiracies investigations underway during the build-up to the rematch, no state wanted to go near the fight. Originally, it was going to take place in Boston, Massachusetts, but as the fight approached, there were fears that the promoters were tied into organised crime, and Massachusetts officials, most notably the Suffolk County District Attorney Garrett Byrne, began to have second thoughts. Byrne sought an injunction blocking the fight in Boston, claiming Intercontinental Promotions was promoting the fight without a Massachusetts licence. Then on May the 7th, backers of the rematch ended the court battle by pulling the fight out of Boston. The promoters needed a new location quickly, whatever the size, to rescue their closed-circuit television commitment around the country. Governor John H. Reed of Maine stepped forward, and within a few hours, the promoters had a new site, Lewiston, Maine, the smallest city to host a heavyweight title bout since Jack Dempsey fought Tommy Gibbons in Shelby, Montana in 1923. It remains the only heavyweight title fight held in the state of Maine. The mayor of Lewiston, Robert Courtrier, admitted he disliked boxing on moral grounds but felt his town, of around 40,000 inhabitants, could benefit from the publicity, and he said, I'm stunned, but I am beginning to recover. There's no question it will mean millions in publicity for the state. As for the impact on our town, it will create some problems for us. The problems always created by a rush of visitors, traffic accommodation, and so on. But we'll cope with them. Lewiston has been the capital of schoolboy hockey, and now we're moving from hockey to fighting.
So in May 1965, before the rematch, Jimmy Breslin recalled a story in the New York Herald Tribune, and he said he reported that Blinky Palermo, who was still out on bail, didn't like the way Liston had spoken about him, ripped a fire axe from a wall case and went after him. Now, Breslin did not actually provide any evidence of his source nor the result of the altercation either, but it did demonstrate that Palermo was still able to intimidate Sonny Liston even to this point. Ali decided not to fly to Lewiston, Maine. Instead, he bought his 10-year-old bus, the 22-seat bus known as Big Red, which was the bus he used to drive to Liston's house that time as well. Now, someone ran a ridiculous story that some supporters of Malcolm X had actually identified Muhammad Ali as a suitable target for revenge. The word was that they had stolen an anti-tank gun from the National Guard Weapons Department and were planning to blast Big Red, the bus, and all who travelled in it to an oblivion. Ali wasn't fazed, and he declared that Big Red would roll out of town, whatever the risks. The king cannot sneak around. I am not afraid. We invite you to dare to make the trip on Big Red and be at ringside Tuesday when the fight was due to take place. However, it was true that the New York police had been investigating Malcolm X's murder and were keeping an eye on Muhammad Ali. Of course, Malcolm was shot once in the chest with a sawed-off shotgun 2 months prior to the rematch. Muhammad Ali was more intent on winding up Sonny Liston one last time, and he actually placed 2 bear cubs in reception at Poland Springs, where Liston was staying, as props for a publicity stunt. Ali was actually supposed to pull up into Liston's headquarters in Big Red and spontaneously confront Liston in the lobby. Well, Sonny obviously got wind of this. He was told about it. But when it came to the crunch, well, the Big Red drove straight past without stopping.
We have gone through many different stories that related to a possible fixed fight in Liston's career profile and the darker side of boxing episode on Liston, and of course Ali's career profile. However, we are going to relay them once again for this episode. And we'll start with Johnny Tocco, who made a very interesting statement on the 1995 HBO documentary about Liston. He said he spoke with mobster John Vitale before the rematch and was told not to pay any attention to what he had heard about the fight. He also told Tocco that he should be glad that he wasn't going to Lewiston. When Tocco asked why, Vitale told him that the fight was going to end in the first round. There have been many rumours that have surfaced around the second fight. Another one is that the mob and the Nation of Islam apparently agreed for Liston to take a dive, with Ash Resnick spearheading the negotiations with a plan for Sonny to earn a percentage of Muhammad Ali's future purses. The benefit of Ali having the World Heavyweight title was not for any financial gain, but more to do with the status the title brings, and a Muslim being the World Heavyweight Champion was more important to them. Although the assassination of Malcolm X had no connection to the fight, his presence in the first alongside Ali obviously created many more conspiracy theories on the back end of his murder. Rumours continued to circulate that Ali might be killed by Malcolm's supporters in retaliation. The FBI took the death threats very seriously and posted a 12-man, 24-hour guard around him. Ali was quoted as saying, "All those police in the hall just for me. I'm a great, great person." Sonny Liston's camp, in turn, claimed he had received a death threat from the Nation of Islam by men dressed in black suits with bow ties. It was the same guys dressed in the same attire that surrounded Ali, and that added to the sense of fear and hostility and resulted in high-level security for this fight.
And there's a lot going on there, but I suppose the convicts here, the conflict with racial tensions was clearly what it was, and people making up stuff in the papers didn't help. And so due to the remote location and the fear of violence, only 2,434 fans were actually present at the 4,900-seat arena, setting the record for the lowest attendance for a heavyweight championship fight. However, the closed-circuit ticket sales for the 258 contracted theatres were around the 630,000 mark. Deals had been done to broadcast the fight live on radio in South America, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Germany and Austria. Satellite would also play live pictures to Britain and Europe. The worldwide audience was estimated at 80 million plus 50 million listeners on the radio. The expected financial return from that was at least $1.5 million, a hell of a lot of money back then. At the weigh-in on the day of the fight, the main commission naively put the scales in the ring. The scales actually needed a hard, even surface to read accurately, so it was a waste of time. Liston actually arrived first. Ali followed a matter of seconds later, according to some looking edgy and nervous. The 500 or so fans in the arena cheered Liston and booed Ali. Liston stepped on to the scales and he was announced at 219.5 pounds. And Willie Reddish said it was obvious the scales are way out. They then placed a piece of wood under him and tried again. Second time around, Liston actually come in at 215. Ali was 206. Muhammad Ali behaved himself. In fact, he was so well behaved that he didn't even react when Sonny Liston shoved his left shoulder. Actually mumbled a couple of things at each other. But the fighters, when they faced off, that was when they exchanged public insults. So he shoved him and Ali ain't reacted. But then obviously when they're face to face, Ali said, "You'll be lucky to stay 6 rounds this time. I'm fast. I'm going to whoop you." Liston replied, "I'll bury you. You shut your big mouth. I'll take care of you tonight." Ali continued, "You won't be as lucky as you were in Miami." Well, Sonny Liston thought he would get in the final word by saying, "I'm going to beat you and all your black Muslim friends tonight." But Ali, of course, did. He got the last word in and he responded, "I'll beat you so bad, I'll make you join the Muslim yourself."
You know, the typical insults between these two, but they weren't shy of insulting each other whatsoever. I think in the second fight, you can see in the lead up to it, Sonny was a lot more vocal in really wanting to beat Ali the second time round. Now, we are going to move in to the fight details and the fight breakdown, of course, itself, because as we know, it didn't last very long. Now, first Liston was accompanied by 4 police officers into the ring, and then Ali, with 2 policemen and half a dozen black Muslim security men, entered the ring, and as at the weigh-in, Liston was cheered and Ali was booed. In the corner before the first bell, Ali bowed his head and prayed, and then turned towards Liston. So now we're going to move into the first round, and the only round of this particular fight. Now Ali, as you can see from the footage that's available, he walks straight out and lands a right lead and moves away, then fired a left hook. Liston ducks low to avoid it. Ali sets off circling the ring to his left. Now Liston, despite what he had said he would not do, he chased him, trying to get his jab off. Sometimes he tried to cut Ali off with single rights to the body. Ali blocked them, or they fell short. Ali looked in no hurry. He made no attempt to get his jab working, fired off no combinations, he just went on circling. Then it happened. Ali checked his advance, feinted to the right, then back to the left, and Liston plodded into range and tried a slow jab, just as Ali stopped moving. This time Ali fired a right hand over the jab into Liston's temple. Liston, who didn't seem to have seen the punch coming, stumbled to his right with the momentum of it, his body bending and his gloves reaching to the canvas. As he touched down, with 1 minute 44 seconds gone, his legs gave away and he fell, rolling onto his back. Referee Jersey Joe Walcott did not react. Ali did not go to the neutral corner. He actually screamed at Sonny Liston in that famous picture, "Get up, you bum! Get up, you yellow bum!" After 10 seconds, Liston was on his hands and knees, attempting to get up. His legs gave way again, and he folded over as Ali continued to dance around the ring, at one point leaping into the air. Walcott, who had still not begun a count, looked across at the timekeeper. Liston eventually hauled himself to his feet after being down on the canvas for 17 seconds. Wow, what a moment, what absolute chaos. And all the footage that's available, which has been updated for 60 frame rates per second and 4K versions of it, you can see now on YouTube. You can see the total and utter carnage that occurs in that moment that Ali lands the punch. Or the question remains, did he really land that punch?
This is a ongoing question, isn't it? But it is quite interesting how Jersey Joe Walcott, terrible referee, he actually spent 5 seconds more wiping Liston's gloves and checking him. What was he doing? Then walked away from the fighters towards Nat Fleischer, who was sitting next to the countdown keeper, Francis McDonnell. And Fleischer yelled at Walcott, he's out, next to McDonnell, who was the official timekeeper. A 54-year-old school teacher from Auburn named Russell Carroll, who later corroborated McDonnell's account of having counted out Liston twice as well. So maybe more than that, more like 20 seconds. Ali and Liston continued to fight until Walcott finally realised that the fight was over and walked over to Liston, who said, when Walcott stepped in, I thought maybe I just didn't hear the bell, thinking he's going to he hasn't even thought, he's just carried on. The fight was over before it even began, and Rocky Marciano once again pronounced boxing as dead. Joe Louis said he got hit by a right hand, but it wasn't no good right hand. He got his jaw broke with a right hand one time and he didn't go down. Clay was on his tiptoes. You don't get that much power on your toes. BBC commentator Harry Carpenter said boxing has been set back a good many years by what we have just seen here tonight. Studio guest Terry Downs, the former world middleweight champion, declared he had hit his daughter harder than Clay hit Liston, and she didn't go down. Red Smith wrote that most of the disgruntled customers began screaming fix and fake, and saying that many of those that said that were actually quite young as well. Whether that matters or not, Liston tried to explain, I didn't quit, I got hit and it hurt good, I felt all screwed up. That's what he said, and he said he would fight on. What choice do I have? Ali said that he had tried to tell Liston to get up. I wanted him to do a little boxing, he said. He then refused to talk bad of Sonny Liston afterwards. He actually said, this is Muhammad Ali. He's a good loser. I'm going to have to go and see him and confront him. When the world turns him down, I'll still be at his side. I wouldn't advise him to retire. Any man looks bad when he fights me.
Jimmy, you've seen every heavyweight championship fight since 1937. What did you think of the one last night?
Well, I've seen them, that's a fact, but last night Clay hit Liston with a punch and he hit the deck, not so much from the power of the punch, but I believe the fella has lost his equilibrium, or something has happened to him in the last couple of years that he's not the fighter he was a few years ago.
In terms of power, how would you rate that punch?
Well, it was a fair punch, fair right hand, but it wasn't a knockout punch. See, there's evidently something wrong with Liston's legs, as I've been saying all week. He don't have the coordination there anymore.
Joe, can you tell me what you saw in the ring, why there was a hesitation?
Well, when Clay hit Liston with a straight right hand, and Liston went down, and as I was trying to get the champ away from over top of Liston, because I didn't know from his action what he was going to do. Anyway, he appeared like he could have been excited, would step on him or kick him or what have you. I didn't know. So as I was trying to get him back to the neutral corner, he continued saying, get up, like he was, if he would, what he would, you know, with this type of thing. So I eventually got him back to close to the neutral corner. Then I come back to Liston to start to pick up the count. I looked over at the knockdown timekeeper, and he was waving his hand in a sense of that it's over. So I ran over to him and asked him what did he mean. He said I counted him out to fight. I counted him out. I counted 12.
Joe, there's a great deal of controversy about this fight. They say that Clay never touched him. Did you see the punch, and what did you think of the fight?
Well, Clay hit him all right, but whether the punch was hard enough to knock him out, I don't think so. I think Liston probably was taking advantage of the knockdown, because he knew that when he down, that whether getting up at count of 8 or getting up at the count of 2, he was still knocked down. So I think that Liston probably would try to take advantage of that. But Walcott, and also that never had a chance to come back to the center of the ring to give him what count it was. And as you know, Clay would run around the ring, you know, and kept Walcott busy running around the ring. So Walcott never had a chance to get back to farm Liston what the count was. And as you know, the referee, when they finally got Clay back to a corner, and Nat Fletcher jumped up and started waving his hand that the fight was all over. So Clay then Walcott went over to check with the knockdown timekeeper, and sure enough, the fight was over.
Was Liston knocked out at that point, or do you think he could have gone on?
Well, Liston was going on. He was fighting when Walcott finally got back to the center of the ring. That Walcott had to stop the fight. Both boys up fighting, so which means that Liston was all right, because he was fighting. Him and Clay were fighting again. A tape of the fight was played out for McDonald in the Holiday Inn. He watched along with reporters and other interested parties, including Ali, who had kept shouting at the screen, "Watch now, watch! Wow, look at how fast I am in slow motion." Many called the fight a fix. Frank Butler claimed Liston did not take a dive, he was just so old he couldn't fight anymore. And he said the Liston-Clay affair was a fraud on the American nation. I emphasise fraud, but it was not a fake. If the fight had been fixed, Liston would have won. The fight mob were on his side. But this still doesn't alter my opinion that the business was the best organised hold-up since the Great Train Robbery. I exclude Clay from the charge, but accuse Liston and his unsavoury backers for cheating about his age and his declining condition. I say he couldn't get up because his legs had gone. Dry rot has set in on a man well over 40 who admits to being 32. Jack Dempsey, Gene Tunney, and the former New York State Commissioner James Farley all argued for an investigation. Tunney felt it was a fake fight and said it was a badly arranged knockout. I wish Jack Dempsey and I could go back and take on those two. It just shakes the confidence of many people in the sport. Dempsey said that federal supervision could not come soon enough. He said it's the only thing that can save boxing. It's going from bad to worse. It's gotten to be a joke. Mark Cram wrote of the fight and said people have gone cross-eyed looking for that punch on film. There is none unless you, in the interest of Ali's legend, desperately want to see one. George Chavallo, who was sitting at ringside, said, Liston's eyes were the eyes of a man faking. When a guy is really stunned, his eyes roll. Liston's were going side to side.
Well, we'll finish off with some other opinions here before we jump onto our show. So, veteran trainer, of course, Eddie Futch didn't need to see Sonny's eyes to know that he was faking. He said, give me a break. Liston had taken the best punch that Cleveland Williams could throw right on the chin and nothing happened. Now, I can't see Ali knocking Liston down with anything. I saw it. I said, boy, they got to be kidding. Ali wasn't a puncher. He wasn't a puncher. Please believe me. After Sonny died, Amos Lincoln actually told us, this guy that knew Sonny, told Lem Banker that Liston wasn't hurt by the punch that knocked him down. Amos also told him that threats had been made against his young stepdaughter. At that point, Lincoln said Sonny just wanted to take the money and run. He shared his thoughts. He said he definitely threw that fight. He never told me as much, but I'm sure he did. Following Liston's second defeat to Ali, he was even more ridiculed, called a coward after the fight for quitting on his stall the first fight, and a sellout for the second for taking a dive. To escape from the public scrutiny and America as a whole, Sonny and Geraldine actually moved to Sweden, where he fought 4 times out there in Stockholm and Gothenburg. The reason for the move out of America was because his license had since been revoked as well by the commissioners from that second fight. The Boxing Society was disgusted. The Denver cops hated him, and he was being stitched up for untold income tax problems. It was ridiculous, unpaid ones. They just took money from him left, right, and centre. Sonny had some money left from the Lewiston fight, but he had not been paid for their Miami Beach fight. He had the other fights as well with Patterson. If he fought in America, the government would take all of his money anyway, so there was no use in making any matches. The Nylons now as well, they disappeared, the 2 brothers. Even the mob cut ties with Sonny Liston because he was no longer, there was no longer need to protect him. Apart from Ash Resnick. Ash Resnick was the other guy that sort of stuck around him. That's just the follow-on of what happened with Sonny Liston after the Clay fights or Ali fights.
Well, Muhammad Ali moved on in his career until he was stripped of his licence for refusing to be inducted into the army. But when he returned, he lost for the first time in his career in the fight of the century against Joe Frazier. He would, of course, go on to fight and win in their trilogy, as well as beat the likes of George Foreman in his career. And obviously, we've done episodes on the Rumble in the Jungle, the Fight of the Century, the Thriller in Manila, so we direct you to go to them if you want a lot more detail in them specific fights and the build-up to them, including his exile and his return to boxing. It is all in them episodes, so please do go and check them out if you want more information on those. And that's really where our story ends for the tale of Sonny Liston versus Cassius Clay, because we've done the huge build-up in the lead-up to the fight, how their careers went up to that point, and of course the controversy that surrounded everything. And I know we've had various conversations before on the episodes that we've covered about this second fight, but I suppose it's just a sort of final conversation regarding this particular second fight. And I know my opinion has kind of varied a couple of times, really, because when we've done these stories and we've learned more from the research that we've put together, a part of me feels like, yeah, it looks like he hits him and he goes down, and maybe he does get old overnight, and maybe he is a lot older. We feel he's a lot older than what he's saying he was at the time from doing his career profile and doing the darker side of boxing. So it's quite possible that he did just get old overnight, and that punch, that glancing blow that landed, in most people's eyes it landed, people that were there at ringside said it landed, he got old, his punch resistance went, and it does happen to fighters. But then on the other side of the coin, we feel that maybe there was a little bit of foul play going on because of how well looked after he was by the mob, and how the mob really had such a huge interest in him after that. And of course, there's always going to be the conversation around his death and how that was really suspicious, and all the facts and information we've put into that darker side of boxing episode on him. You know, there's so many different people that could have quite easily arranged for him to be killed, or actually took part in putting together an accidental overdose, or what the police said was a natural cause of death. You know, it is a really, really strange tale, but these are names that always go together. Again, like we talk about, Ali and Fraser will always be synonymous with each other. So will Liston and Ali, or Liston and Clay, however you want to perceive it. They will always stay together. These names in boxing folklore, even years down the line, even years after we're probably gone, these conversations will still happen. People will still argue either way that it was either a really good punch that landed and Liston got old, or the fact that Liston was actually fixed into this fight and he threw the fight. He threw the fight in the first round.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same as you, Sean, in terms of our we've changed our mind a few times. I think of it initially, I always thought, with how Liston's life was and those that were around him, I sort of felt that he wasn't just going to just get that old overnight and fall down, and his punch resistance was going to be that bad. I suppose over time, and sort of reading more books and watching more documentaries and stuff, and listening to what some of the other guys said in and around at the time, I think it's a quick assumption to say fate, because everyone was disappointed the way it ended. I do sort of, I'm not debating now that I do think the punch does land. I do think it does. I do think it scrambles his senses. But there is a moment where he gets up. For me, he looks like he could get up. It looks like he could beat the count. And then he falls back again. And I think that's the moment where I sort of feel like it was an easy escape from him. I think he'd lost the heart. He had worked so hard to get himself in trim shape for this rematch. And he worked really hard at it. And I mean, just hearing is a very small moment, but you know, when he actually gets told the news that the fight's off because of the hernia problem, it killed him again. I mean, there were so many elements of his life. He was just that sort of personality of things. He works really hard at something, and then something happens. I think he then decides he just goes against himself again. I don't think he trained again as hard as he did. I think he may have lost that desire. I think maybe the death threats were death threats. And when we have discussed this before, I think someone else said it, that he was getting death threats for his second fight, and I think the whole thing scared him a little bit. Like the Islam thing and then the mob thing is like, I think it was a little bit overwhelming for him, and I think he looked for an easy way out. Whether it was a fix or not, I don't know. I think it lands, but for me, I honestly believe that I think Liston's like, when they're saying about his eyes and that, I think he's like, this is a way I could just get out of this. And I think in his mind he's thinking, I'm going to disappear in a way. I think he knew. I mean, I don't know. I just think he was deflated. He had that persona of a deflated fighter after that. The rematch was rescheduled. So for me, I think whether it's a fix or not, I don't know. I don't know if it's something that was just within Liston that night where he's just like, I can't bother with this. I mean, he's only human. We are human at the end of the day. We make mistakes and sometimes things happen. You're like, I just can't feel it. I'm not feeling this. And maybe that's what happened. Or is it because he was in fear of what might happen to him or happen to his family? Who knows? Because why did they flee to Sweden so quickly? I mean, that's the other thing as well. That's another question mark in my head. So yeah, I won't ever. I'm not going to say that it wasn't a shot that didn't hit. I think it does hit him, and I think it is a shot that could scramble your senses, especially top of the head. We've seen it, and we see it all the time in boxing. So, and he was an old man as well. So maybe, and he had never really been whacked before. I can't help but look. You know, Joe Lewis talking about being on your toes. It's true. How can you can't have that power on your toes? It's no. I mean, there is. I just feel for me that's what it is. I feel that he could have got up and he didn't, and I don't know why that was.
I think that's a pretty good way to sort of end that debate from our side, because we've debated it a few times between one another for the purposes of these episodes. And definitively, I think for me, I kind of agree with you in a lot of ways, and I can kind of understand the other side to the story as well, why you could think it was a fix, or there's a lot of reasons why it could have been a fix, but there were also a lot of reasons why it was just one of them moments in boxing where he got his senses scrambled. He wasn't able to get up. He got old overnight. His punch resistance had waned on him, even though he didn't really get hit all too often. He was an older man. There's always the conspiracy around that. I'm sort of in the mind of that we were never going to really know the true story behind whether it was a fix or not. So for now, for me, I just have to see this as it was a moment in time where Sonny Liston just weren't able to get up for whatever reason. He either decided not to get up, or he couldn't get up, or it was because there was 3 big reasons there, and it was one of them reasons, and we will never know the true reason behind it. So no matter how much we sit here and give the pros, the cons of this moment, we're never going to know it. So make your mind up as a listener what you think really happened. And of course, let us know, because it's always interesting to hear people's theories behind it. People love a good conspiracy theory. So I'll be really interested to see what people have got to say. So if you are watching / listening on YouTube, drop a comment below like you have done in our previous Sonny Liston videos. If you're listening, just drop us a comment on social media. If you're on the Patreon page, the Patreon membership service, drop us a comment on there and let us know what you think of this moment. Was it really a fix? Was it just a punch that landed? Was Sonny Liston too old? Could he just not be bothered to get up because it was enough for him? Let us know what you think. Really interested to hear all the different thoughts, feelings and opinions from everybody on what happened here. But overall, I'm really glad that we have done this tale for Legendary Nights, for the series, because whilst the fights may not be legendary fights, as in toe-to-toe wars, there were legendary nights. Both nights were legendary, maybe more in infamy than anything, but they were certainly legendary. They've certainly got people talking about them still all these years later, which is why we wanted to include it, why we wanted to have it as part of one of our seasons for the series, because we feel like there were a lot more details surrounding it that we could certainly talk about, certainly present to everyone, and let people make their own minds up on what really truly happened between these 2 fights. Was there infamy in the first fight? Was he really blinded by a solution that was purposely put on the gloves? There's so many talking points that could go on forever. But this is it for us. This is our episode, the tale of Cassius Clay and Sonny Liston. A tale of 2 fighters that will live in more infamy than legendary, I'd probably say, for these 2 fighters in particular. But it's been a great episode for us to cover. We've enjoyed it. We hope you have too. And if you have, please do let us know on social media at Legend Night Pod on Twitter. You can find us at BTR Boxing Pod on Twitter also, and you can find us at BTR Boxing Podcast Network all across social media. Make sure you check us out on Facebook, on Instagram, on the YouTube channel. Make sure you've subscribed on there and support us there too. If you are a patron of this podcast network, thank you so much for supporting us. We hope you've enjoyed your early access to this episode. We hope you've enjoyed the episode in general, and just a huge thank you as always for supporting us. And that is everything for episode number 5, the tale of Sonny Liston and Cassius Clay.